Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Horcrux Harry. In today's episode, we explore: what if Daphne, Hermione, and Astoria all kissed Harry at Yule Ball and marriage contract triggered? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The night that changed everything. The Great Hall had been transformed into something genuinely beautiful, and Harry hated it a little bit for that. Not because it wasn't impressive. It was. Ice sculptures that caught the candlelight and scattered it in cold blue fragments across the stone floor, frost-white roses climbing conjured trellises, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear winter sky so sharp with stars it made your eyes ache. Professor Dumbledore had outdone himself, or more likely had simply pointed at a few senior students and said make it wonderful, and they had. It was the kind of magic that cost nothing and meant everything, decoration for decoration's sake. Joy made visible. Harry stood at the edge of it all in dress robes that fit him well enough. Hermione had fixed the sizing with a quick charm 3 hours ago, while Ron sulked about his own lace-collared disaster, and tried very hard to feel something that wasn't tired. He'd been tired for 4 months. Since his name came out of the goblet of fire. Since the whole school had decided he was either a glory-chasing liar or a talented cheat, with very little middle ground available. Since Ron stopped speaking to him for 3 weeks and started again without ever properly apologizing. Since every meal became a performance of not looking bothered and every defense class became an exercise in ignoring the whispers. Parvati Patil was a kind date. She'd stopped expecting him to be interesting about 40 minutes ago and had drifted toward Lavender and a cluster of Gryffindors who were actually having a good time. He didn't blame her. He watched the dancing from the wall and ate a chocolate biscuit he'd pocketed from the dessert table and thought, not for the first time, about how deeply strange his life was. "You look like someone told you Christmas was cancelled." He turned. Daphne Greengrass stood 2 feet to his left, which was surprising because he hadn't heard her approach and also because Daphne Greengrass had never in 4 years voluntarily spoken to him. She was in silver-gray robes that managed to look both expensive and effortless. Her blonde hair up in something complicated, her expression doing that thing Slytherin girls seemed to practice in mirrors, perfectly composed, slightly amused, revealing nothing. "I'm fine," Harry said automatically. "Fascinating. You're standing alone at a ball eating stolen biscuits and staring at the ice sculptures like they've personally offended you, but sure." She glanced at the sculpture nearest them, a swan mid-flight, wings caught in the moment before takeoff. "They haven't, for what it's worth. The sculptures are innocent." Harry looked down at the biscuit in his hand. "I didn't steal it. It was on the table. The dessert table that was cleared 20 minutes ago." He had no good answer to that. She didn't seem to require one. She turned back to watching the dancers, and for a moment they simply stood there together in the particular quiet of two people who are both pretending they meant to be exactly where they are. "Where's your date?" he asked, because he was fairly certain she'd arrived with Theodore not. "Dancing with Pansy Parkinson, which tells you everything you need to know about how seriously Theodore takes social obligations. Not bitter, just factual." "Where's yours?" "Dancing with Lavender, I think. Or possibly just anyone who'd have her. Parvati deserves better than me tonight." Daphne tilted her head slightly. It was the first time he'd said something that seemed to actually register with her rather than confirm a pre-existing impression. "That's surprisingly self-aware." "I have my moments." The weird sisters launched into something slower, and the crowd on the floor shifted, couples pulling closer, the quality of the light changing imperceptibly towards something more intimate. Harry watched Cedric Diggory spin Cho-Chang with the easy grace of someone who had grown up at parties like this, who knew exactly what his body was supposed to be doing and did it without thinking, and felt the familiar low ache of being someone who had grown up eating cold leftovers in a cupboard under the stairs and still sometimes forgot that he was allowed to take up space. "You should dance," Daphne said. "I'm not. I don't really. I didn't say you were good at it. I said you should." She looked at him sidelong. "Hiding at walls is a choice, Potter. Own it or don't make it." He stared at her. "Did you just tell me off? I gave you accurate information. What you do with it is your business." But there was something at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, almost a smile, the suggestion of one. Though if you were going to do something other than eat contraband biscuits, now would be the time. The good songs don't last. He wasn't sure afterward what possessed him. Maybe it was 4 months of being tired. Maybe it was the star-sharp ceiling and the cold blue light, and the fact that Parvati had given up on him and Cho was taken and Ron was somewhere complaining to Hermione about Victor Crumb and the whole night felt like a test he hadn't studied for. Maybe it was just that Daphne Greengrass had spoken to him like a person and not like a spectacle, or a cause or a problem to be solved. "Do you want to dance?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he started mentally composing his retreat, the casual never mind, just a thought, the careful backing away from social cliff edge. Then she said, "One dance," and held out her hand. She was a much better dancer than he was. She didn't make him feel it, which was its own kind of skill. She placed his hand correctly without commentary, kept her own movement small enough that he could mirror it without embarrassing himself too badly, and talked, not about dancing, not about what he was doing wrong, but about the eye sculptures, which ones she thought were technically impressive versus aesthetically interesting, whether the enchanted ceiling showed an actual sky somewhere or was purely invented. Her voice was low and even, and it gave him something to track that wasn't his own feet. "The swan is the best one," she said. "It's the only one that looks like it's thinking something. Swans don't think. Everything thinks. Most things just have the good sense not to show it." A pause. "You should work on that, actually. Showing less of what I think. Being less obvious about what you feel. Not the same thing." Her eyes, he noticed, were a very particular shade of blue-gray, like deep water in winter. "You telegraph. Everyone can see when something bothers you. It makes you easier to manage." The song was ending. He could feel it in the shift of tempo, the way the other couples were beginning to loosen their holds. "Is that what people do? Manage me?" "Constantly," she said, without any cruelty in it. "Just the fact, offered plainly. You might consider not letting them." The music stopped. They stepped apart. And Harry Potter, acting on 4 months of accumulated tiredness and 1 dance's worth of the strange intimacy that happens when someone tells you a true thing, leaned forward and kissed Daphne Greengrass on the cheek. It was not romantic. It was barely even bold, a thank you, a punctuation mark, the kind of thing you did without thinking and immediately wondered about. Her cheek was cool against his lips for half a second, and she went very still, and he stepped back and said, "Thank you for the dance?" and meant it. She stared at him. Something moved behind her eyes, not offense, not quite surprise, something more complicated than either. Then she smoothed her expression flat and said, "Don't mention it," and walked away, and Harry went back to his wall and didn't think too hard about any of it. He did not notice the faint silver light that flickered, just for a moment, somewhere beneath her left sleeve. He found Hermione at 10:30, which was later than he'd expected. She was in the corridor outside the kitchens, not a place you'd stumble across accidentally if you didn't know about the pair portrait, sitting on a stone bench with her dress robes slightly rumpled and her eyes bright with something between fury and unshed tears. She'd clearly been crying, or nearly. Victor Crumb was nowhere in sight. "Ron?" Harry asked, settling beside her. "Ron," she confirmed, in the specific tone that meant yes, obviously. Who else would it be? "I don't want to talk about it." "Want a biscuit?" He produced the second one he'd pocketed. She took it without comment and ate half of it in silence. "He said I was fraternizing with the enemy," she said eventually. "Victor's not the enemy. He's a student, he's competing in a tournament, and he's been very kind, actually, and Ron looked at me like I was doing something wrong just by existing near someone he decided he hates, and I just..." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm fine." "You're allowed to not be fine. I know that." She looked at him sideways. "How was your evening?" "You and Parvati looked, we looked nothing." She deserved better and found it. He stretched his legs out. "The corridor was cool and quiet, the party noise muffled to something distant and almost pleasant from here. I had a surprisingly interesting conversation with Daphne Greengrass. Hermione blinked. Greengrass? Has she ever spoken to you before? Not once. She told me I telegraph my emotions and people use it to manage me. A pause. She's not wrong. I know she's not wrong. He looked up at the torchlit ceiling. I danced with her. It was, I don't know. Nice. She talks to you like you're an adult. Hermione was quiet for a moment in the particular way she got quiet when she was processing information faster than she wanted to show. Harry, Daphne Greengrass is a neutral house Slytherin from one of the oldest families in Britain. She doesn't do things without reasons. Maybe she just didn't want to stand at a wall alone. Maybe. But Hermione's voice said unlikely. The kitchens were warm behind the portrait. He could smell mulled wine and gingerbread from here, the house elves putting away the evening's work, and the corridor outside was quiet enough that he heard the footsteps clearly before he saw their owner. Light, quick, the footsteps of someone small who was trying to be faster than they were stealthy. Astoria Greengrass came around the corner at a near run and stopped dead when she saw them. She was 13, Daphne's younger sister. Harry knew her face only vaguely. A third year he had no particular reason to notice except that she had the same blonde hair and the same composed quality around the eyes that her sister did. But where Daphne's composure was a finished thing, polished and worn smooth, Astoria's was clearly a work in progress. She was breathing hard. Her dress robes were the same silver gray as Daphne's, and she had a smear of chocolate on her left cuff, and she was looking at Harry with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. "Oh," she said. You're Harry Potter." "Usually," he agreed. "I was looking for you," she said, which seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him, as though the sentence had gotten out before she'd fully committed to it. Hermione had gone very still beside him in the way she went still when she was paying very close attention. "Why?" Harry asked. Astoria Greengrass took 2 steps forward, stood up on her toes, and kissed him on the cheek. Quick. Decisive. The kind of action that comes from having made a decision and needing to execute it before courage fails. Then she stepped back and looked at him with something that was either triumph or terror, or possibly both at once. "Because Daphne wouldn't stop talking about your dance," she said, "and I wanted to see what the fuss was about." Harry had absolutely no response to this. "And?" Hermione asked, in her most carefully neutral voice. Astoria considered. "He smells like chocolate biscuits," she said, with great dignity, and then turned and walked away at speed, not quite running. Harry and Hermione stared after her. Then Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. "That was very odd," she said. "Very," he agreed. Neither of them noticed the silver light this time either. It was past 11 when he found Hermione again, or rather when Hermione found him. She'd gone back to the party for exactly 20 minutes before retreating permanently, and now she was in the library, at the Yule Ball, which was so perfectly Hermione that he'd laughed when she told him, with 2 cups of tea from the house elves and her dress robes swapped for school jumper and jeans. She'd pinned a note to the library door that said Prefect check, closed until midnight, which was, technically, an abuse of her prefect badge, and which she clearly had absolutely no regrets about. "Sit," she said. "I need to tell you something and I need you to not panic while I do." He sat. "I never panic. You once ran into a wall trying to get away from a spider. It was very fast." "Harry." She set a cup of tea in front of him. "When Astoria kissed you, there was something, I saw something, just for a second, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, but I've been thinking about it since and I think I need to. I think you should know." He looked at her properly. Her eyes were the particular bright they got when she'd figured something out, and the something was significant. Not frightened. Hermione frightened looked different, looked smaller. This was the bright of someone who'd found the edge of something large and was trying to see its shape. "Tell me." There was a light. Silver. "It came from both of you," I think, or between you, and it only lasted a second and then it was gone. I might have imagined it, except that I don't imagine things. She wrapped her hands around her teacup. And I've been trying to work out what it could be, and the only thing I can think of, the only classification of magic I know that produces a spontaneous silver light in response to two people making physical contact for the first time, Hermione, is a betrothal bond activating. She finished. The library was quiet. Somewhere a book settled on its shelf with a soft papery sound. A betrothal bond, Harry said. An ancient one. Pre-ministry, possibly pre-statute of secrecy. The kind that gets written into a family's bloodline and just sits there, dormant, until the conditions are met. She was speaking faster now, the way she did when she was following a thread. Daphne's family, the Greengrasses, they're old. Not Death Eater old, not dark-leaning old, just old. They go back 9 generations of documented wizarding history, possibly more. That kind of family very often has. You're telling me I'm engaged, Harry said. I'm telling you there might have been contract magic triggered tonight. That's not the same thing as, to a 13-year-old. And possibly also to Daphne, yes. I noticed the light then too, but I was trying to decide if I'd actually seen it when Astoria appeared and confirmed. She stopped. Looked at him. You're not panicking. He was not panicking. He was sitting very still with both hands flat on the table and his tea going cold in front of him, and he was thinking about a silver-gray dress and cool water eyes, and you telegraph your emotions and it makes you easier to manage, and he was thinking about 4 months of being tired and a name from a goblet and a tournament he hadn't asked for, and he was thinking, with a clarity that surprised him, well, all right then. What do I do? He asked. I don't know yet. I need to research it. I need to find out if there's actually a Greengrass contract, what its terms are, what rights you have, what they have, whether it's legally binding under current ministry law, what happens if it's contested, Hermione. She stopped. Go find the books. I'll wait. She stared at him. You're really not panicking. Would panicking help? It usually doesn't, no. Then I'll leave it for later. He picked up his tea. Go. She went. And Harry Potter sat alone in the library during the Yule Ball with cold tea and a half-eaten biscuit and what was apparently the beginning of an ancient magical betrothal, and felt, underneath all the complicated strangeness of it, one thing very clearly. For the first time in 4 months, something had happened that wasn't the tournament. Hermione came back 40 minutes later with 4 books, a piece of parchment covered in notes, and Daphne Greengrass. Harry stood up. Daphne looked at him with an expression so neutral it was its own kind of statement, the face of someone who has received bad news and decided, at least temporarily, to give nothing away about what that news was doing to them. She was still in her dress robes. She had a faint color high on her cheeks that might have been cold or might have been something else entirely. Your friend, she said, and her voice was perfectly even, has found a reference to my family's contract in Griphook's registry of binding instruments, which is impressive research for 40 minutes. She's correct about most of it, as far as I can tell. A pause. I was coming to find you anyway. You knew? Harry said. I knew it existed. I didn't know it could trigger. I didn't know. Something moved in her face, briefly. You kissed my sister. She kissed me, actually. And look, you kissed me first. I didn't. That was a cheek kiss. That was nothing. That doesn't. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. Started again. The contract requires a first kiss from the same wizard to all Greengrass women of a generation within a single night under open sky. I want to be very clear that open sky refers to outdoors or to an enchanted ceiling that accurately depicts sky, which the Great Hall qualifies as, apparently. I want to be equally clear that nobody in my family has activated this contract in 3 generations because it requires an extraordinary coincidence of circumstance. Or a Yule Ball, Hermione said, more quietly than Harry expected, where someone dances with one sister and then encounters the other by chance. It wasn't by chance, Harry said. Both women looked at him. Astoria said she came to find me because Daphne wouldn't stop talking about our dance. He looked at Daphne. Did you tell her to? I did not tell her to kiss you, if that's what that's not what I asked. Another silence. Daphne Greengrass looked at Harry Potter with those winter-water eyes, and he looked back at her, and the library was very still around them, and then she said quietly, She's 13. She does what she wants. I may have mentioned that you dance well. That you were better than I expected. Better than you expected, he repeated. Don't read into it. The magic did, Hermione said. They both looked at her. She had the expression she wore when presenting an argument she knew was going to be uncomfortable but was committed to making anyway. The contract magic, it requires genuine first contact. Meaning it doesn't trigger for social greetings or deliberate ritual. It triggers because the wizard in question is someone that the Greengrass women that the magic evaluates as. She glanced at her notes. The original language is Old English, but broadly translated, the contract seeks a wizard the family could grow toward. Not a perfect match. Not an alliance of convenience. Someone with genuine potential for real bond. Daphne's composure held perfectly. Only the slight thinning of her mouth gave anything away. That, she said carefully, is a deeply inconvenient criterion. Yes, Hermione agreed. And there are two of us. Daphne and Astoria. Because the contract covers all women of a generation, and Astoria is 13. Harry said. She's 13. She's 13 now. Hermione said. The contract doesn't stipulate marriage immediately. It creates a betrothal. A formal declaration of intent. The timeline is traditionally set at the coming of age of the youngest contracted party, which in wizarding law is 17. She looked at her notes. That gives you 4 years. 4 years of being betrothed to a Gryffindor. Daphne said, as though testing the shape of the words. 4 years of Merlin. She sat down in a chair, which Harry suspected was the most unguarded thing he'd ever seen her do. My father is going to, he will absolutely. She stopped. Breathed. Looked up. What are your options, Potter? What does the contract say about dissolution? Hermione answered before Harry could. Mutual dissolution by all parties at any point before the first year of the betrothal period has elapsed. After that, it requires a formal Wisengamot ruling, because at that point the bond has. She checked her notes again. Deepened. It's been 2 hours, Harry said. We could dissolve it. Daphne looked at him. Yes, she said. We could. Do you want to? The question sat in the air between them, plain and direct. Hermione, to her credit, looked at the table. Daphne looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, and the balance sat on the edge of the moment. I want to know, Daphne said finally, what your intentions are. Before I decide anything. I don't have intentions. I had a good dance and then your 13-year-old sister kissed me and apparently that's enough to activate a blood contract. He paused. But I'm not going to dissolve something before I understand it. I don't make decisions based on panic. You're 14, she said. And you're 15 and the daughter of a neutral house and apparently better than I expected. We can both surprise people. He held her gaze. Tell me what you know about the contract. All of it. And then we'll decide. Daphne Greengrass looked at Harry Potter for a long time in the light of the library torches. Then she pulled her chair to the table, folded her hands on the surface, and said, Fine. From the beginning, then. They talked until 2 in the morning. When the library lamps finally dimmed themselves, they had not dissolved anything. But there was a third person who still needed to be accounted for, and none of them had addressed it yet. The obvious question, the one hanging in the air of the entire conversation. It was Hermione who finally said it, at the door, when Daphne had gone and it was just the two of them in the dark corridor. She said it quietly, the way she said things she'd been thinking about for a long time. Harry. The contract says all Greengrass women of a generation. Daphne is a Greengrass. Astoria is a Greengrass. She paused. And if the magic evaluated you as genuine, if it measured something real, then it wasn't measuring your feelings for two people. It was measuring who you are. He looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying that when you danced with Daphne and I watched from the side of the room, she said carefully, I thought something. And then when Astoria found you outside the kitchens and kissed you, I was standing right there. Closer to you than she was, almost. And the light. She stopped. The light was brighter. The second time. Harry waited. I'd been reading Griphook's registry very carefully, she said. Very carefully. And there's a footnote, one footnote in 300 pages, about what happens when a contract triggers in the presence of a third party who is not named in the contract but who the bond magic evaluates as. She couldn't quite finish the sentence. Her voice, for the first time all evening, wobbled. Hermione, he said. It's called a compact expansion, she whispered. It's extraordinarily rare. It requires the third party to have been present for at least one of the triggering events, to have a pre-existing bond with the wizard that the magic recognizes, and to be. She looked up. Her eyes were very bright. To be someone the wizard is growing toward. The corridor was very quiet. Did the light touch you? Harry asked. A long pause. Yes, said Hermione Granger. It did. Harry Potter looked at his best friend, her rumpled school jumper and her bright desperate eyes and her 4 books of research and her voice that wobbled only once, and felt something settle in his chest like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. Quiet. Certain. Right. Okay, he said. Okay? She stared at him. Harry, I just told you that you might be, that we might be, okay is not, I know. He looked at her steadily. I know what it is. I know what it means. And I'm telling you it's okay. He paused. Is it okay? For you? Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at him for what felt like a very long time. I need to research it more, she said. That means yes. That means I need to research it more. But she was looking at him with something in her face that he'd never quite seen there before. Not new, exactly. More like something that had always been there and had simply decided tonight was the night to be visible. He nodded. She nodded. They walked back toward Gryffindor Tower together in the quiet of a castle gone to sleep, footsteps soft on cold stone, the Yule Ball winding down somewhere far behind them. On Harry's left wrist, just below the cuff of his shirt, a mark had appeared while they were in the library. He noticed it an hour ago and decided not to say anything until he understood what it was. It was the size of a large coin, silver-edged, and at its center were 3 intertwined lines that moved like water when he looked at them directly. It didn't hurt. It didn't burn. It sat on his skin like it had always meant to be there, calm and certain as a compass point. He pressed his thumb against it once, walking through the dark castle, and felt it pulse twice in response. Warm, alive, settled. He stopped trying to count how many things had changed tonight. There were too many. And counting wasn't the point anyway. The point, he thought, climbing through the portrait hole into the warm, firelit common room where Ron was already asleep in an armchair and everything looked exactly the same as it always had, was what came next. He sat in his own chair by the dying fire, arm resting on his knee, the mark on his wrist catching the last of the ember light. Outside, the snow had started again. He could hear it in the particular hush it put on the world. Everything softened, everything quiet. He was 14 years old, and his name had come out of a goblet against his will, and he was supposed to compete in a tournament designed to kill him, and the whole school thought he was either a liar or a cheat, and Voldemort was somewhere out there getting stronger by the day. And tonight, of all nights, something had happened that was entirely his own. Something ancient and complicated and completely outside anyone's plan for him. Something that nobody had arranged, nobody had manipulated, nobody had used his fame, or his scar or his dead parents to engineer. For once, just once, something had happened to Harry Potter that had happened because of Harry Potter. The fire burned down to coals. He didn't move. The mark on his wrist kept its steady pulse, 3 lines intertwined, patient as winter, certain as spring. Outside, the snow kept falling, and the night kept turning, and somewhere across the castle in the Slytherin dungeons, Daphne Greengrass sat on her bed in the dark with her sleeve pushed up and looked at the same mark on her own wrist, and thought about what it meant to be genuinely surprised by something for the first time in years. And somewhere in Gryffindor Tower, Hermione Granger sat at her desk with Griphook's registry open to the footnote about compact expansion and read the same 3 sentences over and over again, each time finding them slightly less frightening and slightly more like the answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. And somewhere in the third-year girls' dormitory, Astoria Greengrass stared at the ceiling with her hands folded on her chest and a small, private smile on her face, and thought that sometimes the most important things begin with boldness, and that she had been bold tonight, and that whatever came next was going to be very interesting indeed. The Yule Ball ended. The enchanted ceiling slowly shifted from night to the first gray suggestion of dawn. Everything had changed. Chapter 2. The weight of old magic. The mark was still there in the morning. Harry had half expected it to be gone, some residue of ball night magic, something that dissolved with the ice sculptures and the enchanted frost. But when he woke up and pushed his sleeve back, it was there, silver-edged and steady, the 3 interwoven lines moving in their slow water pattern like they had somewhere to be and weren't in any particular hurry getting there. He stared at it for a while. Ron was snoring across the dormitory. The winter light coming through the frost-edged windows was thin and pale and honest in the way that morning after a party always was, stripping the glamour off everything, showing you exactly what remained. What remained, apparently, was this. He got dressed, pulled his sleeve down, and went to find Hermione. She was already in the library. She had been there, by the evidence of 3 empty teacups and a stack of books that had grown significantly since last night, for several hours. She looked up when he came in, and her eyes had the particular brightness of someone who hadn't slept and didn't care. "Sit down," she said. "I've found a great deal." He sat. She pushed a cup of tea toward him, still warm. She'd clearly anticipated his arrival, and opened the topmost book to a page she marked with 4 different bookmarks at once. "The Greengrass Compact," she said, and her voice had shifted into the register she used when presenting research, precise and quick and leaving no room for interruption unless you were very brave. "Written in 1692 by Celestia Greengrass, the then head of the family, during the period immediately following the International Statute of Secrecy. The historical context matters. In 1692, old wizarding families were frightened. They'd just been forced underground. Their political power was contracting. The old alliance systems, the ones that ran on blood oaths and family compacts, were being replaced by ministry bureaucracy that favored newer families with better ministry connections." She turned the book toward him. The page showed a hand-drawn diagram of interlocking circles with annotations in cramped old script. Celestia wrote the compact as a protection mechanism. She wanted to ensure that whoever her descendants bound themselves to would be someone of genuine worth, not political convenience, not financial advantage. Someone the magic itself could vouch for. "The magic evaluates," Harry said, remembering Hermione's words from last night. "Exactly. It's not passive. It's not just a trigger that fires when conditions are met. Think of it like a living test. The bond magic embedded in the compact has been dormant in the Greengrass bloodline for generations, and it wakes up when it senses proximity to someone it finds suitable." She paused on the word, as if it didn't quite cover what she meant. "The kiss is just the mechanism. The evaluation happens before that. By the time Daphne agreed to dance with you, the magic had already made a preliminary judgment. So it decided it liked me before I did anything. Before you did anything it could see," Hermione corrected. "It evaluates, and this is the part one finds genuinely remarkable, it evaluates based on magical core resonance. Not power level, not bloodline, not social standing. The character of the magic. What it's been used for. What it's been through." She looked at him steadily. "Harry, your magic has fought off possession by Voldemort, has cast a Patronus at 13, has survived things that should have broken a core completely. It has a particular quality. The compact felt it. Harry turned his cup of tea in his hands. Outside the library windows, snow was still falling, lighter now, just the last of last night's storm settling. What are the terms? Specifically. Hermione flipped to another marked page. The betrothal period begins at activation and runs until the youngest contracted party reaches wizarding majority, 17. During this period, the contracted parties are bound in the following ways. She ran her finger down the list she'd translated. First, the mark. You've all got one, I assume you've seen yours. He nodded. The marks are connected. They'll pulse when the others are in distress. It's a basic alert system, old blood magic. Second, the magic between contracted parties is stabilized. If any of you are under a curse or hex, the bond acts as a buffer, partial resistance, not immunity. Third, she hesitated. Hermione. Third, during the betrothal period, no contracted party can be formally bound to anyone else through any other magical contract, oath, or coercion. The compact takes precedence. It supersedes. She looked up. Which means that any attempt by anyone, the ministry, another family, anyone, to bind you through magical means is blocked. The compact fights it off. The library was very quiet. That's, Harry started. A significant protection, yes. For all parties. Hermione closed the book. Now. The expansion clause. Her voice shifted slightly, still precise, but with something underneath it that wasn't quite uncertainty. More like care. The way you handled something you didn't want to drop. The compact expansion is, there's very little written about it, because it's so rare. But what I've found suggests that it activates when a third party with an existing bond to the wizard is present during a triggering event, and when the bond magic assesses that third party as someone the compact should include. It decided to include you, Harry said. The magic decided. Yes. She straightened a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. I want to be very clear that I am not, that this is not something I arranged or sought or I know that, Harry said. I just want to make sure you understand that I understand it's complicated. And strange. And possibly completely unprecedented. And that I'm not, that I don't expect anything from you just because ancient blood magic, Hermione. She stopped. He looked at her across the table, the morning light falling between them, cold and clear and honest. I know. And I told you last night it was okay. That hasn't changed. He paused. Has it changed for you? She looked at him. A long look, the kind she usually reserved for particularly difficult arithmancy problems. Full attention, no part of her mind somewhere else. No, she said quietly. It hasn't. He nodded. She nodded. They both looked at the books. Daphne, he said, needs to know about the expansion. She knows about her own bond and Astoria's, but she doesn't know about me. I didn't tell her last night. Hermione pressed her lips together. I wasn't sure how. We tell her today. She's going to be angry. Probably. He stood up, picking up his tea. She can be angry and still have accurate information. She seems like someone who prefers accurate information. They found Daphne after breakfast, which took longer than expected because she was not in the Great Hall, not on the staircases, and not in any of the corridors between the dungeons and the library. They finally located her in an alcove off the Charms corridor, sitting on the window ledge, legs folded, looking out at the snow-covered grounds with an expression that would have read as perfectly neutral to anyone who hadn't spent last night talking with her until 2 in the morning. Harry was beginning to learn the difference between Daphne's resting composure and the one she wore when something was costing her effort. This was the second kind. She looked up when she heard them, took in both of them together, and said, I was wondering how long it would take. Have you slept? Harry asked. Sufficiently. Which almost certainly meant no. She straightened and dropped her feet to the floor, making room on the ledge without quite inviting them to sit. Hermione sat anyway. Harry leaned on the opposite wall. I've been thinking about what to tell my father. What have you decided? Hermione asked. That I need more information first. Her eyes moved to Harry. The mark. You have one. He pushed up his sleeve. She looked at it, not at him, at the mark, and something flickered in her face that might have been relief or might have been the opposite. It matched. The pattern matched mine. What does that mean? Harry asked. It means it's real. It means I wasn't. Last night I thought there was a chance I'd misread it, that the light was something else, that I was catastrophizing over nothing. She pulled her own sleeve back. Same mark, same moving lines, slightly different arrangement. It's real. She looked up. Which means my father needs to know immediately, because if anyone else identifies it first, if Lucius Malfoy sees it, if any of the old family members at this school notice, the information becomes a weapon before we've decided what to do with it. We need to tell you something first, Harry said. Before you talk to your father. Daphne looked at him. Then at Hermione. Then back at him, and her eyes sharpened in a way that made Harry think she was faster than almost anyone gave her credit for. The expansion clause, she said. Hermione went still. You know about it? I know the contract well enough. I've been reading it since I was 12 because my mother thought it was important I understand our family's obligations. A pause. I know the clause exists. I didn't know it had activated until I looked at your wrist just now and counted the lines. She tilted her head at Hermione, not unkindly. 3 lines. 1 for each contracted party. There should only be 2 Greengrass women of my generation. But there are 3 lines. The alcove was very quiet. Outside, a bird crossed the white sky. I'm sorry, Hermione said. I know this complicates. Stop apologizing for something you didn't choose. Daphne's voice was even. The contract doesn't include accidental parties. If you're in, the magic vouched for you. That's not your fault, and it's not a complication, it's a fact. She looked at Harry. You're not surprised that she's included. No, Harry said. Were you surprised last night when you found out? He thought about it honestly. No, he said again. Daphne looked at him for a moment. Then she said very quietly, neither was I. And left it there, and moved on. We have more immediate problems. My father arrives today. Today? Hermione straightened. How does he? Because I sent him an owl at 5 o'clock this morning. Daphne stood up, smoothing her robes. Because I am not going to let Cyrus Greengrass find out about this from anyone other than me, and because if I wait even a day there's a chance someone else at this school will notice the marks. She met Harry's eyes. He's going to want to meet you. All right, Harry said. She blinked. All right? Potter, my father is not a warm man. He is going to look at you and see a Gryffindor with a lightning bolt scar who has somehow activated a contract that has sat dormant for 3 generations, and his first instinct is going to be to find a way to undo it. You should be prepared for, I'll manage. Harry pushed off the wall. What time? Daphne stared at him. Then, very briefly, the corner of her mouth moved. 2 o'clock. Professor Dumbledore's office. He's already been notified. A pause. My father requested the headmaster be present. He trusts Dumbledore approximately as much as he trusts anyone, which is not very much, but it's more than most. I'll be there. We'll be there. Hermione corrected. Daphne looked at her. For a moment Harry thought she might object. This was family business, Greengrass business, and Hermione was the newest and most unexpected part of it. Then Daphne said, Yes. We will. And walked away down the corridor, spine straight, steps measured, every inch of her composed. Harry watched her go. She's frightened, Hermione said quietly, beside him. I know. She's very good at not showing it. I know that too. He watched until Daphne turned the corner and disappeared. We should go over everything you found before 2 o'clock. I want to walk into that meeting knowing more than anyone expects me to. Hermione smiled, not her bright research smile, something smaller and more real. Now you're thinking like a Greengrass. Heaven forbid. said Harry, and meant it as a compliment. Cyrus Greengrass was a tall man who wore his wealth the way old money always did, not loudly, but absolutely. His robes were dark green, superbly cut, and he had the kind of stillness about him that comes not from calm but from very long practice at containing things that aren't calm at all. He had Daphne's coloring, blonde hair going silver at the temples, those winter water eyes, and Astoria's jawline, and an expression when he looked at Harry that was so carefully blank it was its own kind of statement. Dumbledore's office was warm and circular, and full of quietly whirring silver instruments, the portraits of previous headmasters watching from their frames with the careful attention of people who knew they were witnessing something worth noting. Dumbledore himself sat behind his desk with his fingers laced and his half-moon glasses slightly down his nose and the expression he wore when he already knew more than he was going to say. Cyrus Greengrass sat across the desk. Harry sat beside Daphne. Hermione sat beside Harry. Astoria, to everyone's mild surprise, had appeared and simply sat down next to Hermione with the self-possession of someone twice her age, and no one had told her to leave, possibly because no one was entirely sure they had the standing to. The silence lasted about 4 seconds before Cyrus said, "Show me." Harry pushed up his sleeve without comment. Cyrus looked at the mark for a long time. Whatever he was feeling, his face gave none of it away. He looked at Daphne's wrist. At Astoria's. At Hermione's. He paused there, and something moved behind his eyes, and he looked at Dumbledore. "The expansion clause," he said. "It appears so," Dumbledore agreed, pleasantly. "The last time that activated was 1743. Cyrus looked back at Harry. His voice was level, precise, every word placed exactly where he wanted it. "You are Harry Potter?" "Yes." "You are 14 years old, currently enrolled as a Triwizard champion under circumstances that remain legally contested, and you were raised by Muggles in a household with no knowledge of wizarding custom, law, or social structure." A pause. "That is an accurate summary?" "Close enough," Harry said. Cyrus's eyes narrowed very slightly, the first crack in the blankness. He hadn't expected agreement. "And you are aware of what the compact means? What it commits my daughters to? What it commits this family to, in terms of our political standing and our social alliances?" "I've done my research," Harry said. He felt Hermione shift slightly beside him, not quite a nudge, but an awareness. He ignored it, kept his eyes on Cyrus. "I know what the compact says. I know your family's history with it. I know what the legal standing is under current ministry law, what dissolution requires after the first year of the betrothal period, and what the political consequences are of the contract becoming public knowledge." He paused. "I also know that you came here today expecting to find either a panicked boy who'd sign whatever you put in front of him, or an ignorant one who didn't understand what he was signing. I'm either." The room was very quiet. One of the portrait subjects, a stout witch in an elaborate ruff, leaned slightly forward in her frame. Cyrus Greengrass looked at Harry Potter for a long time. "You have 6 months," he said finally. "Under the contract terms, dissolution by mutual consent of all parties is available for the first year. I would like to use the first 6 months of that year to know." Cyrus stopped. "I'm not going to dissolve it," Harry said. "Not in 6 months, not in 6 weeks, not tomorrow. I've decided." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, meeting Cyrus's gaze without any particular heat but also without any give in it at all. "I know that's not the answer you came here for. I know you came here expecting to manage this, to manage me. So let me be clear about something. I don't get managed. People keep trying. It hasn't taken yet. You're a child," Cyrus said, and his voice had gone slightly colder. "I'm a child who survived Voldemort twice," Harry said, and watched the man flinch, just slightly, just a fraction, but it was there. "I'm a child who got put in a death tournament against my will and decided to get through it instead of falling apart. I'm a child who has a mark on his wrist that your family's ancient blood magic put there because it decided I was worth something." He sat back. You can disagree with the magic, but you can't override it. So the question isn't whether the compact stays. It stays. The question is whether you work with me or spend the next 4 years making it harder than it needs to be. The silence after that was different from the one before. Less careful. More real. Daphne, beside him, had gone very still in a way that Harry was starting to recognize, not tension, but attention. The stillness of someone watching something they hadn't anticipated unfold. Astoria, on Hermione's other side, had a very small smile on her face that she was doing an only partially successful job of suppressing. Cyrus Greengrass looked at his older daughter. Something passed between them, a wordless family communication, the kind that runs on years of shared table and shared silence. Then he looked back at Harry. "You understand," he said slowly, "what it would mean for this family. What it would mean for our political position, which we have maintained through careful neutrality for 20 years, to be publicly known as bonded to Harry Potter." "I understand it makes you a target," Harry said. "For Voldemort's people. For Lucius Malfoy, specifically, who I'm guessing has existing pressure on your family to declare for the dark side before it's too late." He watched Cyrus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I understand that bonding publicly to me makes that pressure worse in the short term and removes the option entirely in the long term, because you can't pretend neutrality once you're in a formal compact with the boy Voldemort's been trying to kill since he was a baby." A long pause. "Yes," Cyrus said. "That is precisely the problem. It's also the solution," Harry said. Cyrus frowned. "Explain." "The pressure exists because Malfoy thinks he can eventually push you to declare for Voldemort. He thinks your neutrality is a temporary position, not a final one. The compact removes that possibility permanently. You can't go dark, not with me in your family's contract. Malfoy loses his leverage. Your neutrality becomes something different. It becomes alignment. With me." Harry paused. "With whatever side I'm on." "You're assuming you survive," Cyrus said. "Not cruelly. Just precisely. I'm planning to." Harry held his gaze. "Are you in or not?" Another silence. Longer this time. Dumbledore had not said a word through any of this, which Harry was aware of and grateful for. The old man had let him speak, let him stand, and he appreciated it more than he could quite say. Cyrus Greengrass looked at Harry Potter and seemed to be doing a very rapid and very thorough recalculation of something. Then he said, "I want quarterly reports on your academic standing. I want to meet with you formally at the end of each school year. I want assurance that my daughters are not, that this bond will not be used to leverage anything from this family without full discussion." "Agreed," Harry said immediately. "And I want to know everything, before it becomes public. No surprises." "Agreed." Cyrus looked at Daphne one more time. Then at Astoria. Then, last, at Hermione, and his expression when he looked at her was complicated in a way that Harry filed away for later, not hostile, not warm, something that was working toward acceptance from a significant distance. "Miss Granger," he said. "Sir," Hermione said, perfectly composed. "You're Muggleborn. I am. And you found this contract clause in Griphook's registry in under 40 minutes. A pause. "Daphne, why haven't you made friends with this girl before now?" Daphne looked like she was seriously considering several responses. She settled on different houses. "Rectify that," Cyrus said simply, and stood, and straightened his robes, and said to Harry, without warmth but also without hostility, "I'll be watching, Mr. Potter. I suggest you give me reason to be satisfied. I usually make a strong impression eventually," Harry said. Something crossed Cyrus Greengrass's face that was almost, just barely, amusement. It didn't make it all the way to his mouth, but it got close. He nodded once, shook Dumbledore's hand, and left. The office door clicked shut. Everyone breathed. "Well," said Astoria, into the quiet. "That went better than I expected." "You expected it to go badly?" Hermione asked. I expected Father to attempt to confiscate the relevant books and have you escorted from the castle. Astoria said it with complete seriousness. He was much calmer than that. I thought he was quite controlled, Dumbledore said mildly. You didn't see him at breakfast, Astoria said. Harry looked at Daphne. She was looking at the door her father had gone through, and her expression was doing the complicated thing again. Multiple feelings running beneath a still surface, too fast and too layered to separate easily. He thought about what it must have cost her to send that owl at 5 in the morning. To arrange this meeting. To sit in this room and let him take the lead with her father while she said nothing, trusted him to handle it. Thank you, he said quietly. Just to her. She turned. Looked at him. For what? For not trying to manage it yourself. A pause. Then, very quietly. You were better at it than I would have been. I doubt that, Harry said honestly. But I needed to be the one to do it. I know. She looked at the mark on her wrist. I know you did. Lucius Malfoy's first move came 3 days later. Harry found out about it not through any official channel, but because Draco Malfoy couldn't resist being the one to tell him. He caught Harry on the stairs between the 2nd and 3rd floor on a Tuesday morning, Crabbe and Goyle arranged in the background like particularly dull furniture, and he had the expression he wore when he thought he had something significant to say. My father's filed an inquiry with the Wiesengemot, Malfoy said. About your contract. Harry stopped on the step. Turned. Has he? Challenging its validity. He has 3 arguments. The age of the document, the involvement of a Muggle born under a pure-blood family contract, and your status as a tournament champion, which he says creates a conflict of interest with any formal binding during the competition period. Malfoy's eyes were watching him carefully, looking for the reaction, the flinch, the worry, the visible sign that this had landed. He's very thorough, my father. He is. Harry agreed pleasantly. How'd he find out about the contract? A slight pause. He has contacts. In the school. Right. Harry looked at Malfoy steadily. Not angry, that was important, he'd decided. Anger was information. Tell your father I said hello? And tell him that Griphook's registry, Section 47, Paragraph 8, states that a compact validated by blood magic and confirmed by mark appearance cannot be challenged through Wiesengemot inquiry because it falls outside ministry jurisdiction. It predates the ministry. It's not subject to their review. He paused. He probably knows that already. But it's polite to confirm. Malfoy stared at him. Also, Harry added, starting back up the stairs, tell him that if he has contacts in this school reporting on private matters, he might want to remind them that information about active magical contracts is protected under the 89 Privacy Accords. Using it constitutes a magical breach. The Greengrass family has very good lawyers. How do you know all, Hermione? Harry said simply, and kept walking. Behind him, Malfoy stood on the step in silence. Crabbe and Goyle looked at each other. Neither of them had anything useful to contribute. Harry was halfway up the next flight before he heard Malfoy say, quietly and furiously to no one in particular, He's changed. He had. He hadn't meant to, or hadn't noticed it happening, but the conversation with Cyrus Greengrass had done something to him, the act of sitting in that room and refusing to be small and having it work. It had rearranged something. Not created something new, exactly. Uncovered something that had always been there, and had been buried under 4 years of performing helplessness because that was what people seemed to need from him. He thought about Daphne saying you telegraph your emotions and people use it to manage you. He thought about what it would mean to stop. The common room that evening was busy, holiday cheer still lingering, the fire high, chess games and card games and someone near the window working on a transfiguration essay with the focused misery of someone who'd left it too long. Harry sat near the fire with Hermione, both of them working, him on the second task research, her on the contract expansion documentation she was compiling into something coherent. Ron came and sat with them, which was its own small relief. He noticed the mark on Harry's wrist 2 days ago and demanded an explanation, and Harry had given him one, the full version, no softening, and Ron had sat in silence for a very long time before saying, "Greengrass? Daphne Greengrass? She's never said a word to any of us." "She said plenty to me," Harry had said. "And Hermione's? The magic included Hermione?" "Yes." Another very long silence. Then Ron had looked at Hermione and said, with the strangest mixture of resignation and something more complicated underneath it, "That makes sense, actually." And that had been that, which said something about Ron Weasley that Harry found he appreciated more than he could express. Now Ron was playing Exploding Snap with Neville and Harry was watching the fire and thinking about the second task, which was in February, and about what Malfoy had said on the stairs, and about what Cyrus had said, "You're assuming you survive," and about the mark on his wrist that pulsed warm and steady, and about the fact that he had people now, real people, in his corner in a way he hadn't quite had before. Not just Hermione and Ron. Those were his, always had been, always would be. But something different. Something with legal weight and ancient magic and a father who'd looked at him across a desk and done a recalculation. "Harry," Hermione said without looking up from her parchment, "stop thinking so loud. I'm thinking quietly. You're staring at the fire with your jaw set. You do it when you're planning something." She looked up. "What are you planning?" He looked back at her. The firelight was warm on her face, the familiar face, the one he'd looked at for 4 years across tables and over cauldrons and through difficult moments and had somehow, slowly, been growing toward without ever having a word for it until an ancient contract put a silver line on both their wrists. "I'm planning to stop losing," he said. She held his gaze. "Losing what?" "Everything. The narrative. The story people tell about me." He stretched his hand out and looked at the mark. 3 lines intertwined. "I've been letting other people tell it. Dumbledore, the prophet, the school, the ministry. Malfoy's father. Everyone has a version of Harry Potter they're invested in, and they've been writing it for me." He looked up. "I'm going to start writing it myself." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable." "Good," said Harry Potter. And smiled. Not the apologetic kind, not the uncomfortable kind, not the one that said sorry for existing in your story. The kind that said I'm just getting started. Across the castle in the Slytherin dungeons, Daphne Greengrass felt the mark on her wrist pulse, once, warm, certain, and looked up from her book and thought, "There he goes," and went back to reading. And somewhere in the Malfoy family townhouse in London, Lucius Malfoy sat across a desk from a ministry contact and said quietly, "We need a different approach," and began to plan in earnest. The old magic was awake. And the game had changed. Chapter 3: The Dragon's Court. The egg screamed. Harry had figured that out on night 1, cracked it open in the dormitory bathroom at midnight with the water running, discovered it was actually a clue and not just an instrument of torture, and gone to bed feeling considerably better about the second task than he had any right to. Underwater. Something taken. 1 hour. He had 6 weeks. He was not, this time, going to wait until the night before. The morning after the conversation on the stairs with Malfoy, Harry went to the library before breakfast and pulled everything he could find on underwater breathing. He went through the herbology section for gillyweed, the charms section for the bubblehead charm, the transfiguration section for partial human to aquatic transformation, and found that all 3 had merit and significant drawbacks. Gillyweed required a precise dose and access to a plant that Hogwarts didn't keep in the public greenhouses. The bubblehead charm was reliable but left your hands free while restricting your magic in water. Transfiguration at that level was 60-year minimum. He was writing notes when Daphne appeared and sat across from him without invitation, which was becoming a pattern he found he didn't mind. "You're researching the second task," she said. "Good morning to you too. It's 7 in the morning and you're already in the library?" "I don't offer pleasantries before 8. She looked at his notes. "Gillyweed. I can't get my hands on it easily. Professor Sprout keeps a personal supply in the greenhouse she locks. Not the one students use, the one attached to her office. Daphne said it the way she said most things, factually and without fanfare. She uses it for a personal project involving deep water plant cultivation. She keeps approximately a pound of it in a clay pot on the second shelf. Harry stared at her. How do you know that? I spent 2 months researching this castle because my father wanted comprehensive documentation of Hogwarts's non-classroom resources when Astoria started. I know where most things are. She glanced at his parchment. You need someone to source it or you need to ask Sprout directly. Sprout's friendly. I'll ask. She'll say yes if you explain it's for the task. She has a soft spot for underdogs. Daphne pulled his note parchment toward her, glanced at it, pushed it back. The bubblehead charm is better anyway. Gillyweed puts you on a time limit, and you don't know how long the task will actually run. You've been thinking about this. Of course I have. She met his eyes. You have a mark on your wrist. So do I. Your survival is now a matter of, it's relevant to me. She said it carefully, choosing the words with the precision of someone who was not yet ready to say the more direct version. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. He looked at her for a moment. The early library light was the blue-gray of winter mornings, and she looked, in it, less like the composed and polished Slytherin girl he'd walked past for 4 years and more like someone who was working very hard at something and choosing to do it in his direction. Thank you, he said. Don't be sentimental. Practice the bubblehead charm. I've heard your charm's work is inconsistent. My charm's work is fine. Flitwick gave you an acceptable on your last practical. How do you know what? Do you have access to everyone's marks? No. Astoria has a friendship with a Ravenclaw prefect who has opinions about the grading scale and shares them extensively. She stood. Breakfast ends in 40 minutes. Eat something. You look like you haven't been. She left. Harry watched her go, then looked at his notes, then looked at the door she'd walked out of, then wrote bubblehead charm, practiced daily at the top of his parchment, and underlined it. 3 weeks before the second task, Hermione presented him with what she called a comprehensive strategic brief and what Ron called a small novel. It was 17 pages. It covered the task logistics, the likely location of the hostages, the optimal route through the Hogwarts lake based on topographical maps she'd found in the history section, a breakdown of the scoring criteria from the tournament's previous iterations, and a personal training schedule that incorporated both the bubblehead charm and a series of underwater movement spells that would increase his speed without draining his energy reserves. Harry read all 17 pages. Then he read them again. This is extraordinary, he said. Hermione looked pleased in the way she tried not to look pleased. It's thorough. The topographical section is mostly theoretical since I can't exactly go survey the lake myself, but based on the known depth and the Grindylow population distribution from Kettleburn's documentation, Hermione. She stopped. Thank you. Don't, she said in the same tone Daphne used. Fond, deflecting. The same instinct, he noticed, just expressed through different personalities. He noticed a lot of small things like that. The way Daphne and Hermione had begun to occupy the same spaces without either of them acknowledging that they were doing it. The same corner of the library, the same end of the table at meals when Daphne occasionally sat with them, which had started as startling and become unremarkable with surprising speed. They didn't talk much, not yet. But they talked about things that mattered: books, magical theory, the contract strategy. No small talk. Either of them had patience for it. He'd once caught them in a heated debate about whether the compact's blood magic used rune logic or sigil logic as its base structure, which had apparently been going on for 20 minutes before he arrived and continued for 40 after. He'd sat and listened and thought, without irony, that these were two of the sharpest people he'd ever met, and that whatever came next, he was very glad they were in it. Astoria joined their study sessions twice a week, which had started because she appeared in the library one afternoon, sat down, pulled out her third-year charms homework, and simply did it in their company without asking permission. She was quick. Almost frighteningly quick. She had questions about the contract that cut straight to the logical heart of the issue without wasted motion, and she had opinions about everything, and she had a way of saying uncomfortable truths with such complete sincerity that you couldn't be properly annoyed about it. She told Ron his chess strategy had an exploitable weakness in the endgame, and then showed him exactly where it was. Ron had looked thunderstruck and then said, "Greengrass, if you weren't Daphne's sister, I'd ask you to join the chess club." "I'm still Daphne's sister," Astoria said. "The offer stands." Ron had no response to this. 2 weeks before the task, Lucius Malfoy's second move arrived. It came in the form of a Rita Skeeter article. The Daily Prophet ran it on a Wednesday morning, front page below the fold, with a photograph of Harry from the first task that had been artfully cropped to make him look wild-eyed and unsteady. The headline read Potter's Ancient Contract, Manipulation or Madness? Harry read it at breakfast. Then he read it again. Then he set it down with great care and drank his orange juice. The article was thorough in the way that Skeeter's articles were always thorough, not accurate, but thorough. It suggested that the Greengrass Compact had been deliberately engineered to trigger, that Harry Potter had seduced 2 underage girls at a school dance and used some unspecified dark magic to activate a contract designed to give him control over a neutral noble house. It quoted an unnamed ministry source who called the compact deeply irregular and a threat to established magical order. It quoted another unnamed source, clearly Lucius, who expressed grave concern for the well-being of the Greengrass daughters. It described Hermione as a muggle born of dubious background, whose inclusion in the compact raised serious questions about its magical validity. Harry put the paper down. He was aware of the great hall around him, the noise dropping slightly, people looking, the particular electricity of a public moment that everyone knew they were watching. The Gryffindor table was quiet beside him. Ron had his jaw set. Hermione had not picked the paper up, which meant she'd already read it, which meant she'd been reading it for longer than he had. He looked across the hall. Slytherin table, far end. Daphne was reading the article with the expression she wore when she was furious, and had decided to be very still about it instead. She looked up and met his eyes across the hall, and something passed between them. Not the mark, not the bond, just 2 people who both knew exactly what this was. He looked back at the article. At Rita Skeeter's byline. At the photograph of himself, wild-eyed, unsteady. "Hermione," he said. "Yes," she said, not looking up from her own paper. "How does Skeeter get information that no one should have access to?" "I have a theory about that." "Tell me later." "Right now, who do we talk to about a legal response?" Hermione did look up then. "Legal response? The article defames me, defames Daphne, defames Astoria, defames you. It attributes dark magic where there isn't any, it misrepresents the contract terms, and it quotes sources who are in potential violation of the privacy accords we talked about." He picked up his pumpkin juice. "The Greengrasses have very good lawyers. Cyrus said he wanted to know everything before it went public. This is public." He looked at Hermione. "What's the fastest way to get a formal response in print?" Hermione stared at him. Then she started smiling. "I'll Cyrus directly. He'll have already seen it. He'll be wanting to act. If you initiate contact first, it shows him you're engaged. Do that. This morning." He took a drink. "What else? We need a counter-narrative. The Prophet isn't the only publication. Luna Lovegood's father runs the Quibbler. It's not prestigious, but it's independent, and Skeeter has no pull there." "The Quibbler," Ron said slowly. "Dad reads the Quibbler. Half of magical Britain reads the Quibbler in secret because the Prophet's been boring for a decade." "It's not boring," Hermione started. "It's ministry-controlled," Harry said. "Which is boring in the relevant sense." He thought for a moment. "Can we get an interview? With the Quibbler? Our side of it, our words?" "I can ask Luna," Hermione said. She'll say yes," Ron said confidently. "Luna says yes to interesting things." "This is extremely interesting." Harry nodded. He looked at the article one more time. At the photograph. At the headline. Manipulation or Madness. He thought about what Daphne had said. You're going to start writing the story yourself. No. He'd said that. She looked at him and understood it immediately. Same thing. All right, he said. Let's start writing. Daphne appeared at the Gryffindor table for the first time in 4 years of school at exactly 8:15. She stood at the end of it with a composure that dared anyone to comment, met Harry's eyes, and said, "My father is calling our lawyers. He wants to know your specific objections to the article for the formal complaint." "I'll write them out," Harry said. "I have parchment." She sat down across from him, pulled out a quill and parchment with the ease of someone who had decided to do a thing and was simply doing it. The Gryffindor table stared. She didn't acknowledge the staring. "Tell me what you want to include," Harry told her. She wrote. Hermione occasionally interjected a legal detail, and Daphne incorporated it without comment. Ron passed the marmalade and said nothing, which was very restrained of him. Neville, at Harry's elbow, looked at Daphne Greengrass sitting at the Gryffindor table as if she'd always had every right to be there, and then looked at Harry with an expression that said, quietly and clearly, "Everything is different now, isn't it?" Harry glanced at him, and nodded. Just slightly. Neville went back to his breakfast. The second task was on a Tuesday in February, and it was bitter cold. The lake surface was half-iced at the edges, black and deep in the center, and the Hogwarts grounds around it were packed with students wrapped in every piece of warm clothing they owned. The champion's tent smelled of damp canvas and nervous sweat, and Cedric Diggory was doing controlled breathing exercises in the corner, and Fleur Delacour was speaking quietly in French to herself in a way that sounded like rehearsal, and Victor Crumb was simply standing still with his eyes closed. Harry stood at the tent opening and looked at the lake. He'd practiced the bubblehead charm every day for 3 weeks. It was solid. He'd tested it in the bathroom, held it for 2 hours without strain, tested it while casting other spells simultaneously, tested it while moving quickly. It held. His underwater movement spells were functional. He'd memorized the topographical layout Hermione had put together, and had a clear route in mind. He was ready. Actually ready, not desperately hoping something would work. Ready. The difference, he'd discovered, felt like standing on solid ground versus standing on ice. You used your feet differently? He pressed his thumb to the mark on his wrist without thinking about it. 1 pulse back, then 2 quick ones, Daphne and Hermione, both in the stands. He'd figured out the rhythm over the past weeks. 1 slow pulse was general awareness, someone thinking of him. 2 quick was deliberate contact, a check-in. He'd asked Hermione what it felt like from her end, and she thought about it carefully and said, like someone putting their hand on your shoulder. Brief. Reassuring. He thought that was exactly right. Bagman's amplified voice crashed over the grounds. "Champions, please take your marks." He walked out of the tent. The crowd noise was physical, a wall of sound. He found the Gryffindor section without trying. Ron was red-faced and bellowing something supportive that was lost in the general noise, and Neville had his scarf knotted so tightly around his neck he looked like he was being slowly strangled by it. Beside them, seated in a careful neutral position that was somehow still unmistakably present, were Daphne and Astoria, Slytherin scarves replaced by plain dark cloaks. No house colors. That was deliberate, Harry knew. A small thing, but not a small statement. Hermione was on Harry's other side and she was not watching him. She was watching the lake, timing something with a small watch, her lips moving slightly. Planning. Right to the last second, she was planning. He loved her for it. The cannon fired. Harry cast the bubblehead charm, clean, certain, the familiar pressure of the enchantment sealing around him, took 2 steps forward, and dove into the lake. The cold hit him like a physical thing, a full-body shock that the charm didn't entirely buffer, and then he was under and the world went silent and green-black and strange. The sound of the crowd disappeared. The cold was everywhere, but it wasn't piercing, manageable, like being very cold rather than dying of it. The lake opened up beneath him, vast and dark, with faint bioluminescent shapes moving at depth. He oriented himself using the topographical layout in his head. The Merpeople's village was northeast, in the deepest part, approximately 40 meters down. He'd estimated 20 minutes to reach it at full underwater speed, using the current riding charm Hermione had found. He started moving. The lake was extraordinary. He'd never had time to notice that before. The one previous time he'd been in it had been trying not to drown in it, which narrowed the aesthetic experience considerably. Now, with the charm secure and the route clear, he had brain space for the rest of it. The way the light broke through the ice-laced surface in long green columns, the way the water plants moved even without visible current, the deep water creatures that watched him pass with enormous pale eyes, curious but not threatening. A Grindylow shot at him from behind a rock formation, grabbed his ankle. He shot a finite at it without breaking his movement, and it recoiled and disappeared. And then there was nothing but the green dark and the sound of his own breathing inside the charm. He found the Merpeople's village at 18 minutes. He found the hostages at 19. They were suspended in an air pocket above the village square. Hermione, Ron, Cho Chang, and a girl he didn't immediately recognize. All four of them unconscious, weightless, perfectly preserved in a way that spoke to genuine deep water magic rather than anything harmful. He assessed it in 2 seconds and moved to Hermione first, because he knew her face and her situation, and he stopped himself. Thought it through properly. He could take one. That was what the task required. The Merpeople were watching him, a ring of them, armed with their coral spears, and he'd read about this in Hermione's brief. The hostages were bound by Mermish charm, they wouldn't wake until surfaced, and champions were expected to take their own hostages. He was supposed to take Ron. Ron was his person, his designated hostage. He looked at Hermione. He looked at the ring of Merpeople. Then he reached up and touched the charm seal, the bubble of air around his head, and opened his mouth carefully, not breaking the seal, just redirecting a thin stream of vibration, and produced, badly but recognizably, the approximate frequency of Mermish. The watching Merpeople went very still. He tried it again. 3 syllables. Roughly, friend. Safe. Question. One of the Merpeople, older, heavily scarred, with a leadership quality in the way the others deferred to her, swam forward and looked at him with black pearl eyes. He pointed at Hermione. Then at Ron. Then made a carrying gesture. 2. He wanted to take 2. The Mermish chief looked at him for a long moment. Then looked at Hermione. Then back at him. And her expression changed slightly, in a way that was impossible to read but felt, somehow, like recognition. She said something to the others? He caught maybe a third of it. His Mermish was functional at best. But the circle relaxed. And when he moved toward Hermione, no spear rose to block him. He took Ron first, because Ron was his hostage, and he honored the structure of the thing even when bending it. Then he pulled Hermione's binding free as well and held both of them tucked against himself and kicked upward, and the lake rushed past, and the light grew, and the ice edge of the surface shattered around them as they broke through. The crowd noise returned like a physical blow. He dragged Ron and Hermione to the bank. Turned them on their sides, the water-breathing charms releasing automatically as they cleared the surface. Hermione coughed awake first, immediately and characteristically said, "Harry, you weren't supposed to, the rules say." "I know," he said. "You spoke to them." "In Mermish." She was sitting up, wringing water from her hair, already furious and already fascinated. "Where did you learn?" "I practiced the sounds from the reference you included in the brief." He looked at her steadily. "Page 11. She stared at him. Then she laughed, an actual real one, waterlogged and startled out of her. "I included it as academic context. I used it as practical context." He stood up. "Where are the judges' marks?" The scores were good. Not perfect. He'd taken 2 hostages, which the judges debated at visible length, and ultimately he was given full marks for his own hostage and partial credit for Hermione with a note that showed exceptional magical versatility and independent problem-solving under pressure. Cedric scored higher on technical execution. Harry scored higher on overall points because of the bonus. He ended up tied for first place overall with Cedric going into the 3rd task. The crowd had an opinion about this. It split, loudly and immediately, down lines that had been forming for weeks. The people who'd decided he was a cheat versus the people who'd watched him just speak Mermish and take 2 hostages and thought maybe they'd had him wrong. The argument was audible from 20 feet away, and Harry listened to it while wrapping himself in a towel, and didn't feel anything in particular about it except the distant mild satisfaction of having done the thing he'd set out to do. Dumbledore came to him. Not immediately. He gave the scores first, managed the crowd, spoke to the other champions. But eventually he came, and he crouched beside Harry with that careful quality he sometimes had, where his full attention was completely present and had no performance in it. "Impressive," he said. "The Mermish." Page 11 of Hermione's brief. Ah. The old man's eyes were doing something warm. "I find myself wondering, Harry, whether you intend to continue surprising people." "Probably," Harry said. "The marks," Dumbledore said more quietly. "People are noticing." Harry looked at his wrist. He'd pushed his sleeve up when he came out of the water. It was wet, he hadn't thought about it. The mark was clearly visible in the cold white February light. "Let them notice." Dumbledore looked at the mark for a moment. "That is," he said carefully, "a significant position to take." "It's mine," Harry said. "That's the whole point." The old man stood, put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, said, "Yes, I believe it is," and walked back toward the judge's table. Daphne reached him before anyone else from the stands could. She walked through the crowd with the complete indifference of someone who had decided where she was going and had no interest in the bodies between her and there, and she stopped in front of Harry and looked at him for a moment, and then, very precisely, pulled his sleeve down over the mark. Not hiding it. Just finishing the moment. Closing it. "You spoke Mermish," she said. "Your sister's brief had a phonetic reference. I adapted it." "Hermione's brief," Daphne corrected, and there was something in the way she said it, not possessive, something different, something like accurate and also fine. "Yes," he said. "You took her out with you. She wasn't your designated hostage." "No. The rules, I know the rules," Harry said. "I also know that leaving her at the bottom of a lake is not something I was going to do regardless of what the rules say." He met Daphne's eyes. "Some things aren't negotiable." She held his gaze. Then, quietly, "You couldn't leave her there." "No. Even for the points. Especially for the points." Something shifted in Daphne's face. A movement, small and real, that wasn't about strategy or composure or the complicated math of what this all meant. It was something simpler and more direct. "You're going to be very difficult," she said. "Long term." "Almost certainly," Harry agreed. "I find I'm not as bothered by that as I expected to be." She looked at the lake, already calming back to its dark surface, the last ripples from his emergence smoothing away. "My father sent a message this morning. The legal complaint about the Prophet article was accepted. Skeeter's being investigated for privacy violations." "Already?" "Cyrus Greengrass does not do things slowly." A pause. He said to tell you that the inquiry you anticipated from the Wisengamot was filed and rejected in the same session. The compact is outside their jurisdiction, as you told Malfoy. They can't touch it." "Good." Harry looked at the mark under his sleeve. "How'd they take that?" "Badly," Daphne said, with quiet satisfaction. "Very badly." Astoria appeared at Daphne's shoulder, appearing from the crowd the way she always did, suddenly and completely, as though she'd materialized. She was still dry, which meant she'd been smart enough to stay back while the crowd surged. She looked at Harry with those sharp evaluating eyes. "You spoke to the merpeople," she said. "Roughly. In Mermish." "Roughly Mermish." Page 11 of whose brief? Hermione's. Astoria turned to her sister. "I like her," she said simply. "She's useful." Then, to Harry, "You're bleeding, by the way." "Your hand." He looked down. A small cut from the lake rocks, nothing significant, but bleeding steadily. He'd been ignoring it. He took out his wand and fixed it with a healing charm, basic, functional, done in 2 seconds. Astoria watched the charm with the attention of someone filing information. You're better at healing magic than most fourth years. Necessity, Harry said. That's an interesting word for it. She looked up at him, and the evaluating quality in her gaze sharpened into something more direct. How often have you had to heal yourself because there was nobody else to do it? The question hung in the cold air. Hermione had arrived at Harry's other side, round behind her, both of them looking at Astoria. Often enough, Harry said. Astoria nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. Then you understand self-reliance. She looked at Daphne. He understands self-reliance. I notice, Daphne said. I just wanted to be sure someone had noted it explicitly. She tucked her hands into her cloak pockets. Come on. The prophet photographer is working toward this group from the left. We should move before he gets a shot of all of us together and turns it into tomorrow's headline. They moved. Harry flanked by Hermione and Ron, Daphne and Astoria slightly ahead, the whole group slipping through the dispersing crowd with the practiced efficiency of people who were getting very good at moving together. Behind them, the Daily Prophet photographer got his shot. But it was of an empty lake shore, a few scattered spectators, and a tournament that was already over. That evening, in the library, Hermione put the final page of her contract documentation in front of Harry and said, "Read that last paragraph." He read it. The compact expansion clause, fully activated and legally confirmed by mark appearance on all 4 parties, created a bond that was, the language here was old and formal, insoluble by external parties, unbreakable by ministry decree, and immune to dissolution by force or coercion. The bond could only be dissolved by the will of all contracted parties acting simultaneously and freely. Any attempt by an outside party to separate or diminish the bond would be registered as an act of magical aggression against the contract holder, and could be pursued as such under pre-ministry common law. Pre-ministry common law, Harry said. What does that mean in practice? It means, Hermione said, that if Lucius Malfoy, or the Ministry, or anyone else tries to legally or magically attack the compact, the contract holders, all 4 of us, have legal standing to respond under a law that predates and supersedes modern ministry authority. She paused. It's almost never invoked because no one has an active pre-ministry contract. We do. What can we do with it? Hermione looked at him with those bright eyes. Quite a lot, actually. We could take complaints directly to the Wisengamot as a full panel rather than through ministry channels. We could challenge existing rulings that affect any of the contracted parties. We could, theoretically, request a formal hearing about the tournament itself, its validity, the circumstances of Harry's entry, under pre-ministry standing rather than current law. The library was very quiet. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said slowly, does not know that's available. No. Dumbledore might. Possibly. He's a very good researcher, and he's been watching this unfold with what I think is genuine interest. Hermione closed the document. But nobody has told the Ministry. And nobody has told Malfoy. Harry looked at his wrist. Pressed his thumb to the mark. 2 quick pulses back, both of them. Daphne in the dungeons. Astoria in the 3rd-year dorm. He thought about Cyrus Greengrass saying I want to know everything before it becomes public. He thought about Lucius Malfoy on the stairs through Draco, pressing. Testing. He thought about Voldemort, somewhere out there, getting closer. The 3rd task in 2 months. The graveyard he didn't know about yet, but that was coming anyway, the way winter comes, certain, patient, inevitable. We tell Cyrus, he said. Tonight by all. We tell him what we have and we tell him to sit on it until we need it. Until we need it for what? Hermione asked. I don't know yet. He looked at her steadily. But we're going to need it. Something's coming in June, Hermione. I can feel it. He pressed his thumb to the mark again. I want every advantage in place before it arrives. She held his gaze. Then she pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward her. Dictate, she said. He dictated. She wrote. The library was warm around them, the torches steady, the books patient in their shelves. Outside, the lake settled back to glass. The tournament moved forward. And somewhere in a manor in Wiltshire, Lucius Malfoy looked at a memo that had just arrived from his Wisengamot contact and read the words petition rejected, compact legally unassailable, and felt, for the first time in years, something uncomfortably like being outmaneuvered. He sat with that feeling for a moment. Then he called his owl and began drafting a different kind of letter. Not to the ministry. To someone considerably more dangerous. Chapter 4. The Greengrass estate. The Easter holidays arrived the way they always did at Hogwarts, suddenly, as though the castle had been holding its breath through February and March and finally exhaled into the first week of April. Students flooded the corridors with trunks and owls and the particular energy of people escaping something, and the great hall on the last morning before break had the loose, chaotic feeling of a party that had already technically started. Harry had an invitation. It had arrived by owl 2 weeks earlier, formal parchment, green wax seal, Cyrus Greengrass's handwriting in the precise angular script of someone who had been taught to write by someone equally precise. The letter was short. It said that Harry was welcome at Greengrass Manor for the Easter holiday period if he wished to accept, that his guardian had already been contacted and had provided what the letter carefully described as adequate acknowledgement, and that the invitation extended also to Miss Granger, should she be amenable. Harry had read the letter 3 times looking for the trap and then decided there wasn't one. Cyrus Greengrass did not lay traps. He assessed situations and made rational decisions about them, and this was a rational decision. If you were going to have Harry Potter in your family's ancient contract, you ought to at least know who he was when he was somewhere other than a school meeting. Hermione had spent 3 days deciding. She'd written to her parents, explained as much as she could, received a cautious but ultimately supportive response, and then appeared at Harry's side at breakfast on a Thursday with her decision face on and said, "I'm coming. Someone needs to make sure you don't say something irreversible. I said exactly the right things last time. You told the patriarch of one of Britain's oldest wizarding families that you don't get managed. It worked, but it was close. It worked because it was true. It worked because Cyrus Greengrass respects directness, and you got lucky that he does." She buttered her toast with the precision of someone making a point. "Don't assume the second meeting will run the same way. Ron was staying at the Burrow, which was the right call. The Weasleys had their own version of Easter, and Ron in a Greengrass Manor would have been a social experiment nobody needed." He'd clapped Harry on the shoulder the morning of departure and said, "Don't let them make you use 4 forks." Which was the most useful advice Harry received all week. Greengrass Manor was in Wiltshire, set back from a country lane behind a long approach road lined with silver birch trees that were just coming into leaf. The house itself was old, genuinely old, not the Gothic dramatic old of Malfoy Manor, but the quieter older of something that had been built to last rather than to impress. Grey stone, deep-set windows, ivy on the east face that had been there long enough to become structural. The grounds were large and carefully kept and absolutely silent except for birdsong and the distant sound of water. Harry stood at the end of the approach road with his trunk and Hedwig's cage and looked at it for a moment. "It's beautiful," Hermione said beside him. "It's old," he said, which was the same thing said differently. "They're both true." She glanced at him. "Are you nervous?" "No," he said, and meant it. He'd been nervous for 4 years about everything, every meal at the Dirsleys, every lesson where he might be asked to perform and fail, every moment in public where someone might look at him wrong. He'd run out of nervous somewhere around the time his name came out of a goblet, and he'd had to decide, very fast, what to do with the rest of the year. "Are you?" Hermione considered this honestly. "A little. Daphne and I are getting on, but her father he's a different kind of challenge. He respects competence," Harry said. "Just be yourself." "That's easy for you to say." I'm what?" She glanced at him sideways. "You're very difficult to intimidate. Even when you probably should be." "I grew up with the Dursleys," he said simply. "After that, everything else is relative." The manor's front door opened before they reached it, which meant someone had been watching the approach. Astoria appeared in the doorway, not in school robes, just dark trousers and a gray jumper, her hair loose, and looked at them with her particular evaluating quality and said, "You're 3 minutes early. Father will like that." Then she stepped back to let them in. The entrance hall was exactly what the outside suggested: stone floor, high ceiling, the kind of quiet that came from thick walls rather than emptiness. A staircase curved up on the right. The walls held portraits, not moving ones, just paintings, which Harry noticed immediately and found refreshing after Hogwarts's perpetually opinionated painted subjects. "Mother is in the garden," Astoria said, leading them toward the interior. "She wants to meet you, but she's giving you time to settle first. She's very tactical." She paused at a doorway. "Father is in his study. He says to leave your things, have tea, and come find him when you're ready. He means within the hour." "Noted," Harry said. "Also, there are 4 sets of cutlery at dinner, but only 2 of them are strictly necessary, so don't worry about it." She glanced at Harry with a ghost of amusement. "Ron Weasley wrote to Daphne to ask her to tell you that." Harry laughed, actual and sudden. Astoria looked pleased in the small private way she had. Daphne appeared from a room further down the corridor, and it was the first time Harry had seen her somewhere that wasn't Hogwarts, and the difference was more significant than he'd expected. She was in her own clothes, a dark blue dress, nothing formal, her hair down, and she looked different. Not less composed, but less armored. Like the Hogwarts version of Daphne was a working portrait, and this was the actual face beneath it. "You made it," she said. "Did you think we wouldn't?" Hermione asked. "I thought you'd second-guess yourself on the train and end up at King's Cross arguing about it." She looked at Harry. "Welcome to our home." It wasn't warm, exactly. Daphne didn't do warm, or hadn't yet, but it was real. He could feel the difference. "Thank you," he said, "for the invitation." "Thank my father. It was his idea." "A beat." "I agreed with it." "I know." He held her gaze for a moment. "That's why I said thank you to you." She looked at him. Then she turned and said, "Come on, I'll show you where the tea is," and led them deeper into the house. Tea was in a sitting room that had a fire going despite the mild spring day outside, which Harry found immediately comfortable in the Gryffindor way of someone who associated warmth with safety. The furniture was worn in the way that expensive things get when they've been used for generations, not shabby, just lived in, the leather sofas slightly butter-soft, the rugs with the faded richness of something that had been genuinely beautiful 50 years ago and was still beautiful now, just differently. There was a woman already in the room. Helena Greengrass was not what Harry had expected, which was foolish because he hadn't really known what to expect. She was slight and dark-haired. The girls didn't get their coloring from her, and she had a quality of stillness that was different from Cyrus's. His was controlled. Hers was simply present, the stillness of someone who didn't feel the need to fill space with activity because they were comfortable taking up the space they had. She was reading when they came in, and she set the book down without marking her page, which meant she'd memorized where she was, which immediately made Hermione like her. "Harry," she said. Just his name. No title, no formality. "And Hermione." "Sit down, please." They sat. Daphne poured tea with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Astoria took a biscuit and sat on the floor beside the fire because apparently that was a thing she did in her own home, and nobody commented on it. "I want to say something before Cyrus speaks to you," Helena said, looking at Harry with the same direct winter-water gaze her daughters had. It was hers, Harry realized. They got it from her. "The contract frightened me when Daphne told me. I want to be honest about that. It activated in a way none of us anticipated, and it involved my youngest daughter, who is 13, and my first response was fear." "I understand," Harry said. "My second response," she continued, "was to read the contract more carefully than I had before. I'd read it as history. I read it again as a living document." She picked up her tea. "The magic that activated it, the evaluation component, I've been thinking about what it measures and how. And I want you to know that I've moved from frightened to cautious. And cautious, for me, is quite close to hopeful. It was the most directly personal thing anyone in the Greengrass family had said to him. He didn't have an easy response to it, so he didn't try for one. Thank you for telling me. My daughters are my primary interest, she said simply. Not the politics of it, not the social standing. Them. She looked at Daphne, then at Astoria. Whatever this becomes, that's what I'm watching for. That's what I'm watching for too, Harry said. Helena held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at Hermione. And you, my dear, are an extraordinary surprise. Hermione looked momentarily startled. The expansion clause is not what surprises me. What surprises me is that the magic chose someone who'd been sitting next to him for 4 years. She smiled, and it was Astoria's smile, small, private, satisfied. The magic isn't dramatic. It's observant. It saw what was already there. She picked up her book. Cyrus is expecting you in 30 minutes. Daphne, show them the grounds first. It helps. The grounds helped. There was a walled garden at the back of the manor, not the formal kind but a working one, herbs and early vegetables and some kind of magical plant Harry didn't recognize that appeared to be slowly eating a garden ornament with no sense of urgency. Beyond it, a field sloping down to a stream that was quick and cold and sounded exactly right. Old beech trees at the field's edge, the kind with smooth gray bark and branches that started high up and spread wide, the kind of trees that had been there long enough to stop caring about anything in particular. Hermione was already noting the magical plant situation with the expression she wore when she was going to ask Sprout about something on Monday. Astoria had found a stick somewhere and was poking at the stream with it. Daphne walked beside Harry at the field's edge and neither of them felt the need to say anything for a while, which was its own kind of comfortable. Your mother's remarkable, Harry said eventually. She is. No hedging in it. She grew up in a family that was darker than ours, distant branch of the Blacks, actually, though she'd never admit it in company. She chose different and paid for it in social terms for about a decade and then stopped caring. What made her choose different? Daphne considered. She says it was a conversation she had at 17 with a woman who told her that fear was not a life plan. She looked at the beech trees. She doesn't say who the woman was. Harry filed that away. Does she know what the third task is? No. Do you? No. He was quiet for a moment. Something feels wrong about it. More than the first two. I can't explain it specifically. Trust that. Daphne's voice shifted slightly, still even, but with more weight. When you feel something's wrong, trust it. She glanced at him. I've been reading everything I can find about the tournament's history. The third task has always been, the fatality rate across the tournament's full history is highest in the third task. By a significant margin. I know. He'd found the same statistic. He hadn't told Hermione because she'd already calculated it, and hadn't mentioned it to him for the same reason. How do you feel about that? He thought about it honestly. I feel like it's going to happen regardless of how I feel about it, so feeling badly about it is just wasted energy. He looked at the stream where Astoria was now attempting something that might have been a dam, or might have been a trap for water creatures. I feel like I want everyone I care about far enough back that they're safe when it goes wrong. Daphne stopped walking. He stopped too. She turned to face him directly, which she didn't usually do. Daphne tended toward the sideways approach, the angled observation, the indirect angle of address. Direct was unusual. When it goes wrong, she said. Not if. When. You know something. I know Voldemort is getting stronger. I know someone put my name in that goblet to get me through this tournament, and into something at the end of it. I know the feeling I get when something's aimed at me. I've been getting it for 4 years and it's never wrong. He held her gaze. I'm going to go through the third task, and something is going to happen at the end of it, and I am planning to come back from it. But I'm not planning to pretend the danger isn't there. Daphne looked at him. A long, unguarded look, The kind she didn't usually let happen. Most people, she said carefully, would lie. To make the people around them feel better. Most people aren't in my position. He shrugged. And you deserve accurate information. You said that yourself. I said that about you. She said. The night of the ball. I said you deserved accurate information about the contract. Same principle. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very quietly, I find that I prefer it. Even when it's hard. Good. He turned back toward the manor. Come on. Your father's waiting. Cyrus Greengrass's study was exactly what a study belonging to Cyrus Greengrass should look like, ordered, sparse, with the kind of organization that indicated a person who used the space for actual work rather than display. Books sorted by subject and then author, nothing on the desk that wasn't relevant to something current, a fire that had been burning long enough to warm the room without drama. Cyrus was standing at the window when they came in, him and Hermione together, which had been the unspoken agreement since morning. He turned, gestured at the chairs, sat himself. Miss Granger, he said first. I want to say something to you before we discuss business. Hermione sat straight. Yes, sir. I said something to my daughter last time we met that was poorly phrased. I asked her why she hadn't befriended you before now, and my tone implied that the value was primarily in your usefulness. He met her eyes directly. That was inaccurate and unfair. The magic included you because of who you are to Harry and who you are independently. I want you to understand that this family recognizes both. Hermione blinked. Whatever she'd been prepared for, it wasn't that. Thank you, she said and meant it. Cyrus nodded once and moved on. The legal situation. The Wisengamot inquiry was rejected. Skeeter's investigation is proceeding. She'll face a formal hearing in August. Malfoy has moved away from legal channels. He looked at Harry. He's been in contact with a third party. I don't have confirmation of who yet, but the nature of his recent communications, the coded nature of them, suggests someone outside normal political channels. Voldemort's network, Harry said. Possibly. Or someone adjacent to it. Cyrus's expression didn't change, but something tightened around his eyes. He's escalating because the legal approach failed. This is what Lucius does. He moves through channels until one closes and then finds the adjacent route. He paused. I need to know, Harry, whether you have any protection beyond what Hogwarts provides. The contract, Harry said, protects against binding magic and coercion. Not against direct physical threat. Cyrus looked at him steadily. And I need to know what you intend to do about the third task. Win it. And if it's more complicated than winning? Then I handle what's more complicated. Harry leaned forward slightly. I need something from you. I've been thinking about it since you sent the invitation, and I want to ask directly. He paused. The pre-ministry legal standing the contract gives us. The ability to bring complaints directly to the Wisengamot without ministry intermediaries. I want to use it. Not now, after June. After the third task. He held Cyrus's gaze. I think something happens in June that the ministry is going to try to cover up. I think Fudge is going to make the wrong call when confronted with evidence he doesn't want to accept. And I think when that happens, we need to be positioned to go around him. Cyrus was very still. That's a significant political move, he said. Yes. It would place this family in direct opposition to the current minister. Eventually the whole world is going to be in direct opposition to Fudge's version of reality. Harry said. Better to be early. A silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, distantly, Astoria was apparently teaching Hermione something that involved a minor explosion, and a yelp of surprise followed immediately by laughter. Cyrus's expression flickered almost imperceptibly at the sound, a father hearing his child, momentarily, through the weight of everything else. You're asking me to commit this family to a position of political opposition based on an event that hasn't happened yet, Cyrus said. I'm asking you to be ready. You don't have to commit until after June. But I want the standing prepared. The documentation, the legal groundwork. So that when we need to move, we can move fast. Harry paused. Your lawyers. How good are they? Cyrus looked at him. The best available. Then have them prepared. Harry sat back. I'm going to come back from the third task, Mr. Greengrass. And when I do, everything is going to change faster than anyone is ready for. I'd rather your family be positioned to shape that change than react to it. The study was very quiet. Cyrus looked at Harry with those controlled winter eyes, and Harry looked back with the direct steadiness that was becoming his default register, and the fire burned between them. Then Cyrus said, Your instincts are sound. Your timing is aggressive. It usually needs to be. Cyrus picked up a pen, made a note on the parchment in front of him. Not a long note. 2 words, maybe 3. Harry didn't try to read it. I'll have the standing prepared. The documentation will be complete within a fortnight. He set the pen down. Is there anything else? One thing. Harry hesitated, not from nerves, just organizing. Astoria. The contract marks her as a contracted party, which gives her some of the bond protection, but she's 13. If Malfoy escalates and decides to use family members as leverage, my family is protected, Cyrus said, and his voice for the first time had genuine heat in it. Controlled heat, but real. My home has wards that predate the ministry by 2 centuries. No one enters this property without invitation, and no one leaves under duress. A pause. But you're right to raise it, and I want you to know that I've noticed. He looked at Harry with something that wasn't quite warmth but was considerably more complex than what he'd arrived with. You think about the people in your orbit. I try to. It's unusual in someone your age. He paused. It was unusual in people of my age too, at your age. He looked out the window. I was very focused on strategy at 14. Very focused on correct positioning and family advantage and long-term gains. A beat. My wife cured me of the worst of it. It took some time. It was the most personal thing Cyrus had said to him. Harry received it without comment, just a nod, and Cyrus moved on as though he hadn't said it. Dinner is at 7, Cyrus said. Dress neatly but not formally. Helena finds formal dinners tedious, and I long since stopped arguing with her about it. Right. Harry stood. Thank you? For all of this. Cyrus looked at him for a moment. Don't thank me yet, he said. We have a great deal of road still to cover. But there was something in it, not a rebuff, something more like acknowledgement. The same gesture, just spoken differently. Harry nodded and went to find Hermione. She was in the walled garden with Astoria, both of them crouched over the magical plant that was still working its way through the garden ornament, which turned out to be a small stone rabbit, and which did not seem to be suffering. Hermione had her wand out, and was taking readings with a spell Harry didn't recognize. Astoria was watching with an expression of focused interest. What is it? Harry asked. Lithomandragora, Hermione said without looking up. Stone-eating mandrake variant. Extremely rare. It's using a modified form of the standard mandrake acidic secretion but adapted for mineral rather than organic material. She looked up. Sprout would absolutely, she'd probably cry. Actual tears. It's been here since my grandmother's time, Astoria said. We think she brought it from somewhere in the Mediterranean. Mother says it's a natural alarm system. If anything with hostile intent approaches the garden, it wakes up and gets loud. She looked at it fondly. It mostly just eats ornaments, though. Harry crouched beside them and looked at the plant. It was moving with the slow, determined patience of something that had all the time in the world and knew it. The stone rabbit was down to about 2/3. Does it eat anything else? We found a garden gnome in it once, Astoria said. Father didn't seem particularly distressed about that. Hermione made a quiet note on the small parchment she'd produced from somewhere. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at Harry. How did it go? Good. He's going to prepare the legal standing. He looked at her. He wants to be ready to move after June. He believes you. About what happens in June. I don't know if he believes me specifically. He believes I believe it, which is sufficient. He looked at the Lithomandragora. He's a practical man. Very. Hermione paused. Harry, I need to tell you something. About the contract. She glanced at Astoria, who was watching with her usual attention and showed no intention of giving them privacy, which was so entirely in character that Harry almost smiled. Astoria, this involves you too, actually. Astoria straightened. Tell me. The compact expansion clause. I've been researching what it does to the bond dynamics specifically. Not the legal standing, but the actual magical bond between all parties. She spoke carefully, the way she did when she was covering ground she thought about a great deal. A standard betrothal bond creates a linear connection, contract holder to contract holder, singular. The expansion creates what the documentation calls a web structure. The more parties in the compact, the more points in the web, and each point reinforces the others. Stronger bond, Harry said. Stronger everything. The protective effects multiply. The alert system becomes more sensitive. And there's something else, the bond magic learns. It adapts to the parties over time. In the first few weeks it's essentially fixed at activation state, the baseline evaluation the magic made at the ball. But over time it updates. Updates how? Astoria asked. It observes. Experiences shared by the contracted parties contribute to the bond's depth, I suppose, is the closest word. The more real contact between all parties, the stronger and more responsive the bond becomes. She looked at Harry. Which is why this week matters. Not for the legal standing, not for the political strategy. But because being here, in this house, with Daphne and Astoria, is doing something to the bond that time apart at school couldn't. Harry looked at his wrist. The mark was warm, had been since they arrived, he'd noticed it and not mentioned it. Warmer than it usually was, not uncomfortably so. Like a fire turned slightly higher. Can you feel it? He asked. Yes, Hermione said quietly. It's warmer. Yes. It started on the approach road, Astoria said, with perfect matter-of-factness. I've been feeling it since you got here. She showed her wrist, same mark, same silver lines. It does this when you're near. More than it does at school, where we're in the same building. She looked thoughtful. I think it's the lack of barriers. No house boundaries, no castle structure. Just proximity. The garden was warm in the April afternoon, the Lithomandragora working away at the stone rabbit, the sound of the stream over the wall, birdsong and spring light. The manor behind them with its old stone and lived-in furniture and a family that was cautiously, carefully deciding what Harry Potter meant to them. I want to say something, Harry said to both of them. Astoria looked at him. Hermione looked at him. I know this started because of the contract. I know none of us chose it exactly, and I know it's complicated and there are legal implications and political implications and your father is managing half of them and Hermione's managing the other half. He paused. But I want to be clear that it's not just, I'm not in this because the magic put a mark on my wrist. I'm in it because of a dance in the library and a girl who kissed me outside the kitchens and a conversation about ice sculptures and the Dragon's Court, and 17 pages of research that I read twice. He looked at Hermione first. Then at Astoria. You're not obligations. I need you to know that. Astoria looked at him for a long moment with those evaluating eyes that were, he was beginning to understand, the most honest part of her. She evaluated because she cared what was true, because she'd rather know than not know, because real was always better than comfortable. I kissed you because I wanted to see what the fuss was about, she said. I told you that. A pause. The fuss was warranted. Harry smiled at her. High praise. Don't push it. But she was smiling too, small and real. Hermione reached over and put her hand briefly over his. Just a second, just contact, and the mark pulsed warm and the garden was very still around them. I know, she said. I know you mean it. She withdrew her hand. That's rather the problem. Why is it a problem? She looked at him with that particular expression, the one that had been there at the ball, the one that said something was already true before I had words for it. Because it makes it very difficult to be appropriately cautious about the whole thing. He thought about saying something. Decided against it. The moment didn't need words, it had enough of its own weight already. Come on, he said instead. Dinner's at 7. I need to work out which forks are optional. Dinner was the most comfortable formal meal Harry had ever attended, which was not a high bar given that his previous experience of formal meals involved either Hogwarts feasts or the Dursleys' version of entertaining guests, which had always included detailed instructions on how invisible to be. The Greengrass table had 4 sets of cutlery and candles and proper crystal, and also Astoria arguing with Daphne about Quidditch rule interpretations, and Helena asking Hermione genuinely interesting questions about Muggle educational theory, and Cyrus saying very little but listening to all of it in a way that accumulated into something. He asked Harry, once, what his earliest magical memory was. Not as a test, just as a question. Harry told him about the time he'd accidentally operated onto the school roof to get away from Dudley's gang. Cyrus listened, made a sound that was the closest he'd come to an appreciative noise, and said, Instinctive apparition at, how old? 8, I think. That's notable, Cyrus said carefully. I didn't know what it was at the time. No. But the magic did. He picked up his wine glass. The contract was quite thorough in its evaluation. It was the closest Cyrus came all evening to saying something about the compact that wasn't strategic or logistical. Harry received it the same way he'd received everything else from this man, quietly, filed it, moved on. After dinner, Daphne found him in the entrance hall where he'd gone to give Hedwig water from a standing bowl she'd discovered with a seeker's eye for advantageous resources. How are you finding it? She asked. Not the house, him. I like it here, he said honestly. It feels real. The house. Your family. He looked at her. You're different here. Everyone's different at home. You're less. He searched for the word. Defended. She looked at him. Is that a criticism? No. I like it. He held her gaze. I like the version of you that doesn't need to armor everything. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Hedwig finished drinking and shuffled on Harry's shoulder, which she claimed as a perch, and watched Daphne with round amber eyes. The third task, Daphne said. You're more worried than you're showing. I'm not worried, he said. Then, more honestly, I'm prepared for something serious. There's a difference. What do you need from us? He looked at her. The question was so direct and so practical and so completely like her. No preface, no softening, just the heart of it. What do you need? Nothing specific, he said. Just be reachable. After. Whatever happens, just be. He touched the mark on his wrist. Be on the other end of this. Daphne looked at his wrist. Then at her own. Then back at him. And she did something he hadn't seen her do in 5 months of knowing her. She reached out and pressed her thumb to the mark on his wrist. Not the bond pulse, not a magical communication. Just contact. Just her hand on his arm, thumb against the silver mark, steady and certain. We're not going anywhere, she said quietly. The mark was very warm. Good, he said. And meant it in more ways than he could count. The last night of the break, Harry sat on the window ledge of his borrowed guest room and looked out at the grounds in the dark. The beech trees were shapes against the sky. The stream was invisible but audible. The walled garden was a darker rectangle of dark, and somewhere inside it the Lithomandragora was quietly doing its patient work. The mark pulsed once, slow, warm. Just awareness. Someone thinking of him. He couldn't tell which of them, which he found he didn't mind. It didn't need to be specific. He pressed his thumb against it and felt the pulse come back, 2 quick, then a pause, then 1 slow. 3 of them. All 3 in sequence. He held his wrist for a moment, the mark warm against his palm, the night outside cool and dark and full of spring. June was coming. He knew what was waiting in June, or enough of it, the tournament's end and whatever was beyond the tournament's end, the graveyard he didn't know by name but recognized by its particular gravitational pull on everything. Voldemort. The moment that had been building since Halloween 1981, the moment that never really ended, just paused. He was ready for it in a way he hadn't been ready for anything in his life before. Not because he wasn't afraid, he was, underneath the certainty, in the way you're afraid of falling even when you've decided to jump anyway. But because he had people, real people, with marks on their wrists, and a father preparing legal documents, and a mother who'd moved from frightened to cautious to something close to hopeful. Because he had Hermione's 17 pages and Daphne's ice-cold accuracy and Astoria's fearless evaluation and Ron's steady presence, and an ancient bond that had looked at him and decided he was worth something. He wasn't performing strength. He wasn't hiding fear to look braver than he was. He was simply ready. In the way that a thing that has been growing in the dark is eventually ready for light, not because the dark is over but because it was always going to end. The night outside was quiet. The estate lay around him, old and certain, full of old magic in the walls. He closed his eyes and let the mark pulse against his palm, warm and steady and triple-threaded, and slept better than he had in 4 months. Chapter 5. The Ministry Moves. The Owl arrived on a Monday. Harry was in charms, practicing a modified Aguamenti variant that Flitwick had introduced as extension work for students who'd finished the standard curriculum early, when the tawny Ministry Owl dropped through the classroom window with the particular aggressive confidence of official post. It landed directly on Harry's desk, ignoring the 12 other students in the room, and stuck its leg out with the attitude of something that had been told to be dramatic about its delivery. The letter had a ministry seal. Not Fudge's personal seal, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement seal, which was different, and in some ways more significant. Harry broke it while Flitwick watched from the front of the room with an expression of careful neutrality. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first established that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, in cooperation with the Wisengamot Standing Committee on Ancient Magical Instruments, had opened a formal review of the Greengrass Compact on the grounds that it constituted a potentially coercive magical bond affecting a minor. The second paragraph stated that Harry was required to present himself for questioning at the ministry no later than the 15th of May. The third paragraph informed him that failure to appear would constitute grounds for emergency dissolution proceedings and that the ministry reserved the right to act in the interests of the minor parties involved. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his bag, and went back to his Aguamenti variant. Flitwick waited until the end of class. Then, as students filed out, he said quietly, "Mr. Potter." "A word." Harry stayed. Flitwick was small and precise and had been teaching magic for longer than most of his students had living grandparents. He looked at Harry with eyes that had seen considerably more than they usually let on and said, "I couldn't help but notice the seal on that letter." "DM Lee," Harry said. "And the Standing Committee. Combined jurisdiction is unusual." Flitwick folded his hands on his desk. "It suggests the inquiry was requested at a level above standard departmental authority." A pause. "The minister's office, perhaps." "Probably." Harry picked up his bag. "Professor, do you know anything about pre-ministry legal standing? Whether it's ever been successfully invoked in a modern Wisengamot setting?" Flitwick looked at him for a long moment. "I know of 2 cases," he said. "One in 1962 and one in 1978. Both successful, though the 1978 case required considerable preparation." He tilted his head. "Are you asking academically?" "Not even slightly," Harry said. Flitwick made a sound that in a less composed person might have been a laugh. "Then I would suggest," he said carefully, "that preparation is the operative word. And speed. The ministry moves slowly when it wants to appear thorough and very quickly when it wants to appear decisive." He looked at the window where the owl had entered. "Today is Monday. The 15th is in 12 days. "I know." Harry shouldered his bag. "Thank you, Professor." "Mr. Potter." Harry stopped. Flitwick's expression was precise and warm and very deliberate. "You are, Whatever else anyone says about you, an exceptionally good student when you're engaged with the material. A pause. I hope you're engaged. Very, Harry said and meant it. Hermione was waiting outside the classroom. She had the letter. He'd sent Hedwig to her the moment class ended with a copy he'd made on the walk to the corridor, a quick geminio that reproduced it perfectly. She'd read it 3 times and had her thinking face on, the one where she was simultaneously running 5 different logical threads and trying to prioritize them by urgency. Fudge, she said. Almost certainly. And Lucius threw fudge. This is the adjacent route, the one Cyrus said he'd find after the legal challenges failed. She fell into step beside him, both of them moving toward the library with the unconscious synchronization of 4 years of navigating problems together. The framing is clever. Coercive bond affecting a minor targets Astoria specifically. It's designed to look like child protection rather than political interference. And if we respond defensively, we look like we're arguing against protecting Astoria. Exactly. They've chosen the ground very carefully. She was quiet for a moment, working it. We need to change the ground. Cyrus's lawyers need to know today. But the legal response alone isn't enough. If this goes to the Wiesengemat Standing Committee, we need a public response simultaneously. The legal argument works in closed chambers, but the public narrative. She stopped walking. Turned to face him. Harry. We need to do the Quibbler interview. He'd been thinking the same thing. Luna's father? I owed him 2 weeks ago, after the Prophet article. He's interested. He's actually very interested. He said the contract story was the most genuinely fascinating magical news since the Philosopher's Stone incident, and that he had questions. She paused. Some of his questions are about Raxperts, but most of them are legitimate. Can we do it before the 15th? If we go this week. She started walking again. I'll him today. But Harry, this has to be all of us. Not just you. The narrative needs to show the compact as it actually is, which means Daphne and Hermione and, well, Astoria's parents would need to consent for her to be included, but I think Cyrus might actually want her included, because the best counter to coercive bond affecting a minor is Astoria herself explaining that she kissed you of her own free will because she felt like it. Harry thought about that. Then he smiled. Astoria explaining anything is quite the weapon. She's terrifyingly articulate. Hermione agreed, with something that was both impressed and slightly rueful. I've started checking my own reasoning when she's in the room because she finds holes I miss. They reached the library. Pushed through the door. Their usual table was available. It usually was, by some combination of habit and the subtle social signal that had developed over months of them working there. Other students tended not to sit at that particular table, Harry had noticed. He hadn't worked out yet whether it was the contract or just their collective tendency to look busy in a way that discouraged interruption. Daphne was already there. She looked up when they came in, and she had the letter too, an identical one, delivered to the Slytherin table at the same time his had arrived, which meant the ministry had sent them simultaneously, which was its own statement about how coordinated this was. The 15th, she said. I know. He sat down. We're doing the Quibbler interview. She looked at him steadily. When? This week if we can arrange it. He looked at both of them. All of us. With Astoria if your parents agree. Daphne was quiet for a moment. My father will agree, she said. He's been waiting for the right moment to make a public statement. A Quibbler interview it's not the Prophet, but it's not the Prophet, Harry said. That's the point. The Prophet is Fudge's instrument right now. The Quibbler is independent, and it has more readers than anyone admits, and it says what it actually thinks. He paused. We don't need the audience that trusts the ministry. We need the audience that reads the Prophet and thinks something's wrong but doesn't have another source. Daphne absorbed this. Then she nodded once, with the decisiveness she brought to conclusions she'd arrived at after full consideration. I'll father immediately. She already had parchment out. What else? The pre-ministry standing, Hermione said. Cyrus's lawyers should file it now, before the 15th. Not as a defensive measure, as an offensive one. File the pre-ministry standing and use it to challenge the committee's jurisdiction before the hearing happens. If we can establish that the standing committee doesn't have authority over a pre-ministry compact, the hearing becomes moot. Can they establish that in 12 days? Harry asked. Cyrus said his lawyers were the best available, Hermione said, and there was a precision in how she said it, not boasting on Cyrus's behalf, just using his own assessment as data. The legal argument itself isn't complicated. It's the same argument that got the Wiesengemat inquiry rejected. The Standing Committee has even less authority than the full Wiesengemat over pre-ministry instruments. It's a subset. If anything, the case is stronger. She looked at Daphne. Tell him to move today. Daphne was already writing. Today, she confirmed. Harry leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The library was warm and quiet around them, late morning light coming through the high windows. He pressed his thumb to the mark, felt the double pulse back, both of them, present, engaged. He thought about Flitwick's word. Preparation. There's one more thing, he said. Both of them looked at him. When I go to the ministry, and I am going, regardless of what the lawyers file, because declining to appear looks like hiding and I don't hide. He met their eyes in sequence. I'm not going alone. Obviously not, Hermione said. I mean, I'm bringing all of us. Cyrus as well, if he'll come. I'm going to walk into the D'Amelio with the Greengrass family lawyer, the compact documentation in full, and enough pre-ministry legal standing to challenge anything they throw at us in that room. He paused. And I'm going to be the least frightened person in the building. Because Fudge counts on people being frightened of the ministry. He's been counting on it since September. Daphne finished her letter, set down her quill, and looked at Harry with those winter water eyes. You want to make it clear that we're not on the defensive. I want to make it clear that we're on offense, he said. We've been reactive since the ball. The Prophet article, the Wiesengemat inquiry, this letter, we've been responding to their moves. I want to make the next move first. The Quibbler interview is the next move, Hermione said. The interview and the jurisdictional challenge, simultaneously, 3 days before the hearing. He looked at both of them. By the time we walk into that ministry building, everyone in Wizarding Britain who reads the Quibbler, which, as Ron's dad established, is a significant portion of them, will have read our account. And the Ministry's committee will know their jurisdiction is being challenged in the same session. He paused. We don't give them the hearing they planned. We give them a different one. The library was very quiet. Then Astoria appeared from between two shelves, dropping a stack of third-year Transfiguration books onto the table with a solid thump, and said, I've been listening from the history section for 4 minutes. I'm in. Daphne looked at her. You were supposed to be in class. Free period. I used it productively. Astoria sat down and pulled one of the books toward her. Father will agree. I'll write to Mother separately because she has more practical authority over Father than he admits, and it will move faster. She opened the book, looked at Harry. The interview. I want to tell my own version. Not have someone else explain what I did and why. Absolutely, Harry said. Good. She looked at her book. Also, I wanted on record that I kissed him entirely voluntarily because he smelled like chocolate and Daphne's description of the dance was compelling, and any suggestion that I was coerced is not only incorrect but frankly insulting to my decision-making capacity. There was a pause. That, Hermione said quietly, is exactly what the interview needs. Xenophilius Lovegood arrived at Hogsmeade on Wednesday in a set of robes the color of a traffic accident, vivid orange with purple trim, and a traveling bag that appeared to be making sounds. Luna came with him, serene and barefooted despite the May cool, and led him through Hogsmeade to the private room at the back of the 3 broomsticks that Madame Rosmerta had made available with the pointed generosity of someone who had opinions about ministry overreach and was happy to assist the opposition. Harry arrived with Hermione and Daphne. Astoria arrived separately with a letter from both her parents authorizing her participation and a column that said she'd been waiting for this. Cyrus had written with his approval and the additional note that the jurisdictional challenge had been filed the previous evening and that the ministry's legal department had already been in contact with his lawyers, which he described as encouraging. Xenophilius Lovegood was, Harry discovered within approximately 90 seconds, entirely genuine. He was strange, the robes, the bag sounds, a tendency to pursue tangents at speed, but underneath the eccentricity was a journalist's actual instinct, the real kind, the one that wanted the true shape of a story rather than the convenient one. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions that went sideways at the moment you expected them to go straight, and ended up at the actual heart of things faster than a more conventional approach would have managed. He asked Harry, "When your name came out of the goblet, what did you feel?" "Tired," Harry said. Xenophilius wrote that down with great satisfaction. "And when the contract activated, what did you feel then?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Like something had happened that was mine. That nobody had arranged." "Oh, that's very good," Xenophilius said, writing quickly. "That's very good indeed." He asked Daphne about the ice sculptures. She looked momentarily surprised. It was not the question she'd been prepared for. "What about them?" "You told him which one you thought was best." "Which was it?" "The swan," she said. "It was the only one that looked like it was thinking." "And you told him this because?" "Because it was true," she said. "And because he was standing at a wall eating a biscuit looking like someone who needed something true told to them." Xenophilius beamed. "You see, this is what I mean," he said to no one in particular. "The ministry wants to tell me this is a coercive bond, and here are two people who had a conversation about ice sculptures." He asked Hermione about the research. She gave him the technical version first, and he let her finish it, and then said, "And when you saw the light? The second light, when Astoria kissed him and you were standing right there. What did you think?" Hermione was quiet for a moment. Harry watched her from the side, the way the question had landed. "I thought," she said carefully, "that I'd been standing right there for 4 years. And I didn't quite know what to do with that." "But you weren't afraid of it," Xenophilius said. "No," she said. "I wasn't afraid of it." He saved Astoria for last. He looked at her across the table with genuine interest, not the slightly patronizing interest adults usually brought to 13-year-olds, and said, "Miss Greengrass, tell me, in your own words, what happened." Astoria folded her hands on the table and said, with the complete composure of someone who had been thinking about this since February, "Daphne came back from a dance at the Yule Ball and she was different. She was, not softer, Daphne isn't soft. More honest with herself. She told me about the conversation she'd had and I thought, I want to see what kind of person makes my sister more honest with herself. So I found him. And I kissed him on the cheek. Because that seemed like the right way to evaluate whether what Daphne felt was the magic already starting or whether it was something real about him. She paused. It was both. The magic was starting. And he was real. She looked at Xenophilius. The ministry is suggesting I was coerced. I want them to explain, specifically, how a 13-year-old girl is coerced into something by a 14-year-old boy in a school corridor when she found him on purpose and he was sitting on a bench looking surprised. She tilted her head slightly. I'll wait. The room was very quiet. Luna, sitting in the corner with a butterbeer and a copy of something that might have been a book or might have been a magazine, looked up and said dreamily, "She's going to be very good at this when she's older." "She's very good at it now," Harry said. Astoria looked at him with those evaluating eyes. "Thank you," she said with great dignity. The article ran Friday morning. Harry was in the great hall when the Quibbler owls came in, not one owl but a loose flock of them, because the Quibbler's distribution network was chaotic but enthusiastic, and the special edition Xenophilius had promised had apparently warranted extra print runs. The owls deposited copies at breakfast tables across the great hall with democratic indifference to house boundaries, and for about 30 seconds there was the particular silence of a large group of people reading simultaneously. Then the noise came back. The article was exactly right. Xenophilius had written it in his own distinctive style, which was nothing like the prophet's formal structure, and the difference was the point. Where the prophet told you what to think, Xenophilius showed you the people and let you do the thinking, and the people in this article were very clearly real. A girl who talked about ice sculptures, a girl who described her sister becoming more honest with herself, a girl who dared the ministry to explain their coercion theory to her face, and a boy who said the contract had activated something that was his, not theirs. Not the institution's, not anyone else's arrangement. The headline was, "The Greengrass Compact, What the Ministry Isn't Telling You." Below it, in smaller text, a special report, "The true story of an ancient magic the ministry has decided it doesn't like." By the time breakfast ended, Harry had received 12 owls from students' parents, who'd seen the early edition and wanted to know more. He received a howler from someone he didn't know that burned itself out before it could open, which presumably meant the ministry had gotten there first. He received a note from Professor McGonagall that said, very simply, "My office. Lunch. Well done." He wasn't entirely sure if the well done was for the article or for something else, but from McGonagall it felt like sufficient. Draco Malfoy passed him in the corridor between Charms and Transfiguration and said nothing at all, which was more telling than anything he could have said. McGonagall's office at lunch was warm and orderly and smelled of Edinburgh, somehow, which Harry had never been able to explain but which meant he'd always found it grounding. She was behind her desk with the Quibbler article in front of her, reading glasses on, and she looked at Harry over them as he came in. "Sit," she said. He sat. She finished the paragraph she was on, set the magazine down, took her glasses off. "The jurisdictional challenge," she said. "I assume you're aware the ministry's legal team has already responded. Cyrus told me this morning. They're contesting the pre-ministry standing on the grounds that the compact wasn't registered with the ministry at its creation in 1692 and therefore can't claim pre-ministry standing when it suits the holder but not when it doesn't," McGonagall said crisply. A weak argument but not an unintelligent one. She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Potter, I am your head of house and I am going to speak to you as such, which means I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't, and then advise you accordingly." She paused. "Fudge is not doing this alone. The request to open this investigation came from Lucius Malfoy through 3 intermediaries, each of whom has significant ministry connections. The goal is not to protect Astoria Greengrass. The goal is to dissolve the compact, which removes a neutral noble house from your side of whatever is coming, and to discredit you publicly in the interim." "I know," Harry said. "You know." She looked at him. "How?" "Because it's the logical move if you're Lucius and the legal challenges have failed." He met her eyes. "The question is what he does after the hearing fails too." McGonagall was quiet for a moment. "You're confident the hearing will fail. The jurisdictional argument is solid and the public narrative is already set. By the time we walk in on the 15th, the committee is going to look like it's attacking a 13-year-old girl's autonomy while her own family sits in the room telling them to stop." He paused. Fudge is not popular enough to survive that look right now. His approval rating in last month's polls was the lowest since Millicent Bagnold. McGonagall looked at him. A long look, the kind she usually reserved for students who had done something either exceptional or catastrophically inadvisable. "Where did you get Fudge's approval rating?" "Hermione. She's been tracking the political situation through The Prophet and 3 other publications since September." "Of course she has." McGonagall looked at the Quibbler article again. "There is something I want to raise with you, Potter, that falls outside the bounds of your contract and the ministry hearing." She set the magazine aside with a precision that meant what came next was being chosen carefully. "You are a Triwizard champion. The 3rd task is in 6 weeks. Whatever is happening politically, I need you focused on that task. Not because the tournament matters." She said the word with a flatness that told him exactly what she thought of the tournament as an institution. but because I believe you are correct that something beyond the tournament is waiting at the end of it. And I would prefer you walk into that something with every possible advantage. Harry looked at her. What do you know about what's coming? I know what Dumbledore knows, she said, which is not everything but more than he tells most people. A pause. I know the graveyard is a possibility. The word landed between them like a stone in still water. Harry watched the ripples. The graveyard, he said. It's a theory. A well-supported one. She met his eyes without flinching from the weight of it. I want you to be ready, Harry. Not cautious. Not careful. Ready. He thought about the mark on his wrist. The 3 pulses. The Greengrass estate at Easter, and Daphne's hand on his arm, and Hermione's 17 pages, and Astoria's complete fearless certainty, and Cyrus preparing legal documents like building fortifications. I am ready, he said. And meant it in the specific way McGonagall needed to hear it, not performed bravery, not teenage recklessness. The stillness of something that had already decided. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face that she'd been a teacher too long to let out fully, but which was there nonetheless. Good, she said. Now eat your lunch. You look like you've been skipping meals again. The Ministry of Magic on the morning of the 15th of May was all marble and movement, the atrium with its golden fountain, the flow of witches and wizards in work robes going about the Ministry's idea of a normal Tuesday, the golden grills of the lifts and the pneumatic tubes, and the sense of an institution that had been the center of its world for long enough to forget that the world extended past it. Harry walked through the atrium beside Cyrus Greengrass and did not look impressed by any of it. Cyrus had come. Helena had come. Daphne walked on Harry's right, Hermione on his left, Astoria slightly behind, with the particular quality she had in public of being simultaneously very present and entirely unreadable. 2 lawyers from the Greengrass firm flanked Cyrus, compact, quiet men in dark robes who moved like people who spent their professional lives being underestimated and had learned to make it useful. They took the lift to level 2. DMLE. The doors opened and a ministry assistant who had clearly been sent to meet them stepped forward with a practiced professional smile that faltered slightly when she counted the group. Mr. Potter, she said. The committee is expecting, all of us, Harry said pleasantly. We're the contracted parties. The compact covers all of us equally under pre-ministry common law, which means we all have standing in this hearing. He held her gaze. The jurisdictional challenge was filed on the 12th. Has the committee reviewed it? The assistant looked at her clipboard. Back at him. Aye, the committee requested that. Has the committee reviewed it? Harry repeated, the same pleasant tone, no heat. I'll check, she said, and moved quickly away down the corridor. Cyrus, beside Harry, said nothing. But he tilted his head very slightly in a way that Harry was beginning to understand meant well done. The committee room was smaller than Harry expected, 7 seats arranged in a horseshoe around a central space, 5 committee members already in place, with 2 seats empty at the top of the horseshoe that he guessed were for whoever was meant to preside. A long table against the side wall with chairs, apparently for parties attending. The room had the specific quality of a space that was designed to feel imposing from the center and slightly superior from the surrounding seats, the architecture of institutional judgment. Harry looked at it and thought unhelpfully that Hermione would have an interesting architectural analysis of it. Hermione, reading his sideways glance, said very quietly, I know. The witness placement is deliberately disorienting. Face them directly and don't let yourself be angled toward the chairman's position. How do you know which one is the chairman's position? The chair with the slightly higher back. Second from left. She didn't look away from her own steady survey of the room. The ministry's lawyer is the man in the blue robes pretending to review documents. He's already read everything he needs to read, the paper shuffling his performance. The Greengrass lawyers? Cyrus said very quietly, from Harry's other side. Already aware, said the taller of the two, without looking at the ministry man at all. They took their seats. The committee filed in fully, 5 members of the Standing Committee on Ancient Magical Instruments, people Harry didn't recognize, all of them in full wizarding court robes that added a ceremonial weight the room was presumably designed to amplify. The chairman was a broad-faced woman in her 60s named Edessa Werple, who Harry had looked up before coming and who had been on the committee for 11 years and had voted consistently in line with ministry leadership on every contested matter he could find a record of. "This hearing is convened," Werple said, "for the review of a magical instrument, specifically the Greengrass Compact, activated December 25th of last year, to determine whether said instrument constitutes a coercive bond affecting a minor party under the Magical Instruments Oversight Act of 1947. She looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter, are you represented?" "I'm represented by the contracted parties and their legal counsel," Harry said. "As filed." Werple's expression tightened slightly. "The committee has reviewed the jurisdictional challenge submitted on the 12th, and," one of the Greengrass lawyers said. Quietly. Politely. Absolutely not moving. "And the committee's position is that while the instrument itself predates ministry authority, the challenge to ministry jurisdiction requires full Wiesengemot panel review before. Full Wiesengemot panel review was requested in the original jurisdictional filing," the same lawyer said. "On page 4, paragraph 2. Has that request been forwarded?" A pause. "The forwarding process requires, how long?" Another pause. "Standard procedure is 60 days. Which means," the lawyer said, "that this committee's jurisdiction over the matter is currently under active challenge and the full panel review is pending. Which means, respectfully, that this hearing cannot proceed without the committee potentially acting outside its current legal authority." He paused. "That would be unfortunate." The room was very quiet. Werple looked at her colleagues. Her colleagues looked at the lawyers. The ministry's lawyer had stopped pretending to review documents. Harry looked at the center of the horseshoe and waited. It was Daphne who spoke next, and she did it quietly and precisely and with the complete composure of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment. "Chairwoman Werple, the Greengrass Compact was written under pre-ministry common law by Celestia Greengrass in 1692. It has never been registered with the ministry because it predates the ministry's existence, and its activation conditions made registration unnecessary. It has activated once in its history prior to this year. It is a living bond endorsed by the magic it represents, and confirmed by mark appearance on all contracted parties." She paused. "The suggestion that this committee has authority to review, challenge, or dissolve an instrument that predates its own institution's existence by 47 years is not a legal argument. It's a political move. And I think everyone in this room knows that." One of the committee members, younger, on the far left, shifted in his seat. "Furthermore," Daphne continued, "the framing of this review as child protection is incorrect, and I'd like the record to show that the youngest contracted party is present, is represented by her parents." She gestured to Cyrus and Helena, both seated at the table with the stillness of people who were very comfortable with formal rooms. "And has something to say about the nature of her participation." Werple looked at Astoria. Astoria looked back at Werple with those 13-year-old eyes that contained considerably more than 13 years' worth of clarity and said, "I kissed Harry Potter on the cheek in a school corridor because I wanted to. My parents were not present. He was not present in any arrangement or plan. He was sitting on a bench with Hermione Granger looking surprised." She folded her hands. "The word coercion requires someone doing the coercing. I'd be grateful if the committee could identify who that was." Silence. "The Quibbler article," one of the committee members said, not quite under his breath. "The Quibbler article was accurate," Astoria said pleasantly. Harry looked at Werple. Werple was doing the calculation. He could see it happening behind her eyes, the rapid reassessment of where she was versus where she'd expected to be when she'd walked into this room. The jurisdiction was challenged. The public narrative was set. The families were present, united, and not remotely performing distress. The youngest party was demonstrating an articulacy that made the coercion framing look not just wrong but faintly absurd. "We'll need to recess," Werple said. "Of course," Harry said. They stepped out. The corridor outside was ministry neutral, Beige walls, moving memos, the particular hum of an institution that was never quite quiet. Cyrus stood with his lawyers in a low murmur. Helena had her hand on Astoria's shoulder, not restraining, just present, the specific contact of a parent reassuring a child that they'd done well without needing to say it aloud. Hermione came to Harry's side. "The younger committee member," she said quietly. "Far left. He voted against the ministry's position twice last year on minor matters. If the committee is going to fracture, it's through him." "I noticed." Harry looked down the corridor. "Do you think they dissolved the hearing?" "I think they have to." She paused. "Whirple is political, but she's not stupid. The jurisdiction challenge is legitimate, and she knows it. Proceeding without the full Wiesengemot panel sign-off exposes the committee to challenge." She looked at the closed door. "She's going to come back out and announce a recess pending the panel review. Which will take 60 days, and the tournament will be over by then." "Yes." Harry thought about that. About what the tournament being over would mean. About June, and the graveyard McGonagall had named like a landmark on a map you were trying not to follow. "Good," he said. "That's what we want." Daphne appeared on his other side, completing the flanking formation that had become their default in public spaces without any of them ever deciding to make it one. She looked at the door. "Whirple's going to back down," she said. "Hermione thinks so too," Harry said. "It's not that she believes we're right," Daphne said. "It's that she believes proceeding is more costly than retreating. These are different conclusions that arrive at the same decision." She paused. "Lucius is going to be furious." "Good," Harry said for the second time. Daphne looked at him sideways. "You find his fury satisfying. I find his plans failing satisfying. The fury is a side effect." He paused. "What does he do next?" "He goes around the ministry," Daphne said. "He's already gone around the ministry, we think, the contact Cyrus's network identified, the one he's been writing to in code. If the legal and institutional routes are closed, he goes directly." She held his gaze. "Which means he stops playing the game through other people. Which means he becomes more dangerous," Harry said. "Yes." "Good," Harry said for the third time, and this time both Daphne and Hermione looked at him. He met both looks evenly. "I'd rather know where the threat is coming from than have it working through intermediaries I can't see clearly." The door opened. Whirple came out with the expression of someone swallowing something unpleasant, while maintaining appropriate dignity. She looked at Harry. "The committee will recess pending full Wiesengemot panel review of the jurisdictional challenge. We anticipate a reconvening date no sooner than mid-July." "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it to sound exactly as generous as it was, which was not very. Whirple went back inside. The door closed. Cyrus appeared at Harry's shoulder. "That," he said quietly, "was handled correctly. The lawyers did most of it," Harry said. "The lawyers provided the framework. You provided the room." He looked at Harry with those controlled eyes that Harry was getting better at reading. "There's a difference." They walked back through the ministry, the corridor, the lift, the atrium with its golden fountain. Harry looked at the fountain as they passed it. Witches and wizards and centaurs and goblins and merpeople, all in bronze, all looking upward toward the light, all arranged in the specific hierarchy of something that had been wrong for long enough that it looked normal. He thought about what came after June. About what he wanted Wizarding Britain to look like when the smoke cleared. About Daphne talking about neutral houses and political standing and the difference between alignment and obligation. About Hermione's research and Astoria's fearlessness and Cyrus's careful fortifications of legal standing and Helena moving from frightened to cautious to something close to hopeful. He thought about the graveyard. About Voldemort getting stronger. About the thing that was coming at the end of the tournament that he'd been walking towards since his name came out of a goblet. He was going to walk into it. And walk back out. And when he did, everything that he'd built here, this network of people with marks on their wrists and a father with the best lawyers available, and ancient magic that had decided he was worth something, was going to matter in ways that went far beyond the personal. He pressed his thumb to the mark as the golden grills closed around them and the lift began to rise. 3 pulses back. Immediate. Warm. All 3 of them, all at once, saying the same thing without words. We're here. We see you. We're not going anywhere. Right, he said quietly, to no one in particular. The lift emerged into London's grey May morning. The wizarding world went about its business, unaware that the ground had shifted again, slightly, certainly, the way all significant shifts happened, beneath the notice of anyone not paying close attention. Harry Potter walked into the morning and paid close attention. That evening, back at Hogwarts, he sat in the library in the worn, familiar company of his people, Hermione with her documentation, Daphne with a book she was definitely reading even as she tracked the conversation, Astoria doing homework with the brisk efficiency of someone who found it mildly beneath her but handled it anyway. Ron had appeared at some point in the afternoon, eaten 2 of the biscuits Hermione had brought from the kitchens, asked 2 incisive questions about the ministry hearing, declared the outcome well good, they deserve it, and settled into his chess problem with the focused ease of someone who had decided his role in all of this was to be reliably present and occasionally perceptive. Which was, Harry thought, precisely the right role. Ron understood exactly what he was and wasn't equipped for, and the self-knowledge was something he'd started appreciating more than he used to. June, Hermione said, not looking up from her parchment. She said it with the specific flatness of someone raising something they'd been circling for a while. June, Harry said. 6 weeks. 5 weeks and 4 days, Astoria said, without looking up from her homework. Everyone looked at her. I've been counting, she said simply. It seemed relevant. Harry looked at the mark on his wrist. At the 3 lines that moved in their slow water pattern. At the evidence of something ancient and patient, and entirely certain of itself that had decided, on a winter's night full of ice sculptures and stolen biscuits, that he was the right person for a very complicated job. 5 weeks and 4 days, he said. Let's make them count. Outside, the May evening settled over Hogwarts in long gold light, the lake going still, the grounds going quiet, everything exactly as it had been every evening for 1,000 years and also completely different. Lucius Malfoy, in a manor in Wiltshire, sealed a letter and handed it to a very particular owl and watched it fly south toward a destination he'd been keeping in reserve. The letter contained 1 word, repeated 3 times for clarity. Now. 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 Chapter 6. The Graveyard, and after the 3rd task's maze was alive. Harry knew it before he stepped inside, could feel it, the way you feel a storm before it arrives, something in the quality of the air around the hedges that said the magic here was not decoration. The hedges were 20 feet high, dense and dark, and they moved with the slow purposefulness of things that had been told to. The crowd in the stands was enormous, every seat filled, the noise of physical pressure even at the entrance. The other champions were in their own starting positions, Cedric at the northern gate, Fleur at the east, Victor at the west. Harry at the south, with the most ground to cover to the center where the Triwizard Cup stood on its conjured plinth. He pressed his thumb to the mark once. Felt 3 quick pulses back, Hermione, Daphne, Astoria, all of them in the stands somewhere, all of them telling him at once that they were there. He held on to that for a moment. Then he looked at the maze. Bagnon's voice boomed across the grounds. The cannon fired. Harry went in. The maze was 3 things, a navigation problem, a combat problem, and a willpower problem, and they arrived in no particular order. The boggart he met in the 3rd junction showed him Voldemort standing over a ring of bodies, Hermione, Daphne, Astoria, Ron, all of them down. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, which was long enough to recognize what it was and short enough to avoid letting it set. Then he cast the counter-charm, the boggart buckled, and he moved. No hesitation. He'd already faced the thing he was most afraid of losing and decided not to let that fear be a leash. The blast-ended scrut that hit him at the 7th junction was a different problem, too large for a direct curse to manage and too fast for avoidance alone. He went sideways, drew it into a section of hedge where the narrow passage worked against its size rather than his, and hit it with a concentrated reducto that took out a segment of hedge and gave him the opening he needed. His left forearm was scorched where a tail blast had caught him. He noted the pain, prioritized it below the path, and kept moving. The Imperious curse came from Victor Crumb. Harry heard him before he saw him, footsteps wrong, too deliberate, moving with the rhythm of someone whose body was being operated rather than inhabited. He came around a corner and Victor was there, eyes glazed, wand already raised, and Harry had a fraction of a second to decide. He cast the shield so strong it threw Victor off his feet. Victor hit the hedge, rolled, and came up still under the curse. Whoever had hit him had set it deep, and it wasn't breaking from impact alone. Harry crossed the distance fast, pressed his wand to Victor's sternum, and cast the counter-curse with everything he had. A second. 2. Victor blinked. The glaze cleared. He looked at Harry with something that was equal parts confusion and horror and said, in accented English, "There was someone I know." Harry said. "Can you stand?" "Yes." "Stay here. Red sparks if you need help. Don't trust anyone you meet in here." Victor looked at him. You do not take me out of the competition. I need you not under the Imperious curse more than I need the points," Harry said and moved. He was aware, as he went, that this was wrong. Not the maze. The maze was a challenge he'd expected hard. This was wrong in the specific way that the whole tournament had been wrong since September. Someone inside the maze putting a champion under the Imperious curse was not the tournament going wrong. It was the tournament being used. He ran. The cup was at the maze's center. He could feel it, the directional pull of the portkey enchantment even from 3 junctions out, a compass needle sensation under his sternum. He moved faster. The last 3 junctions were clear, suspiciously clear, the hedges still, no creatures, no curses, and that suspicious clarity told him everything he needed to know about what was at the center. He came out of the last passage and Cedric Diggory was already there. Standing 5 feet from the cup, wand drawn, looking at it with the expression of someone who had also registered the suspicious clarity, and was working out what it meant. They looked at each other. "Something's wrong," Cedric said. "Yes," Harry said. "The cup is a portkey." Harry looked at it. The familiar tournament gold of the thing, sitting on its plinth, completely unremarkable except for the pull he could feel even from here. Someone put a portkey inside the tournament, instead of the actual prize. Cedric processed this. He was smart, Cedric. Harry had always known that, had watched him navigate the tournament with a steady intelligence that deserved more credit than the handsome and popular narrative usually gave him. "Crumb," he said. "I heard something. I thought it was the Scroots. Crumb was under Imperious. Someone in the maze put him under it." Harry looked at Cedric. "Someone set this up. The whole tournament was the setup." "To get you to the cup," Cedric said. "Yes. So don't touch it. If I don't touch it, the tournament doesn't end. The crowd is in the stands, Dumbledore's watching, the judges are watching. Whoever set this up has a plan B." Harry looked at the cup. At the pull of it. At the end of everything that had been building since September, since the goblet, since a name that wasn't supposed to be there. "And I'd rather face whatever's at the other end on my terms than wait for plan B." Cedric stared at him. "You're going to grab it deliberately." "I'm going to grab it knowing what it is, which is different from being tricked." He looked at Cedric. "You should use your red sparks. Get yourself out. And leave you two, Cedric. Someone is waiting at the other end of that portkey for me specifically. You're not part of this. Go." Cedric was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not leaving you to face whatever that is alone." Harry looked at him. "You should." "Probably," Cedric agreed. "I'm not going to." He stepped forward and stood beside Harry, looking at the cup. "Whatever this is, you shouldn't face it alone." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the cup. Then he reached forward and felt Cedric grip the handle beside him at the same instant he did, and the world dissolved in a roar of wind and color. The graveyard arrived all at once. Dark. Cold. The smell of turned earth and old stone, the particular silence of a place that had been quiet for a long time and intended to continue. A hill of gravestones in varying states of decay, moonlight cutting between clouds, and at the center of it a yew tree that had been there longer than the graveyard around it, and would be there after. Cedric had his wand up before his feet were properly under him. Harry had his up before that. Something moved behind the nearest gravestone. He had approximately 3 seconds between the small cloaked figure emerging from behind the stone and the thing it was carrying moving and the green light. He threw himself sideways, grabbed Cedric's arm, and pulled, and the curse hit the gravestone behind them and they were already moving. He felt the mark on his wrist blaze hot, not the warm pulse of contact, something else, something sharp and urgent, the bond registering something significant. He was on his feet, Cedric behind him, scanning the graveyard in the dark. The figure had stopped. It was small, wizened, holding a bundle that was making the specific sounds of something very old that was nevertheless very much alive. Wormtail, Harry said. The name came out of him like a stone, flat and certain. The figure flinched, then steadied, and Harry felt the curse coming before it left the wand, some instinct, the mark blazing, for months of training and listening to the mark's edges, and he cast the shield while simultaneously pulling Cedric out of the line, and the killing curse went wide and hit the yew tree, and the tree didn't care. The cauldron, Cedric said low and quick. Over there. He'd seen it too. Black iron, enormous, already smoking. Set up before they arrived. We stop it, Harry said. He didn't know if they could. He knew they were going to try. He pulled Cedric left, putting gravestones between them and Wormtail, working the terrain the way Hermione's lake topography had taught him. You use what's there, you read the space before you're in it, you don't let the environment happen to you. He sent a reducto at the cauldron from behind cover, heard it ring against the iron without penetrating, reinforced, charmed, meant to withstand. Wormtail hit him. Not a curse, physically. The small man was stronger than he looked, magically augmented, and the impact drove Harry into a gravestone hard enough to make his vision swim. He hit the stone, bounced off, used the momentum to roll rather than fall, came up with his wand already casting, a binding charm, solid, the kind McGonagall had taught in November, and it caught Wormtail around the midsection and pulled his arms down. The bundle, Harry said, already moving. Whatever's in it, he needs to get to the cauldron with it. Cedric hit Wormtail with a full body bind from the other angle, and the small man went rigid and toppled sideways into the dirt. A silence. Harry stood in the graveyard with his wand raised and his arm bleeding from where the gravestone had caught it, and looked at the cauldron and the bound man and the bundle on the ground that was making sounds he didn't want to identify, and thought very quickly about what to do. We can't destroy it, he said. The bundle. We don't know what destruction does to. He stopped. We need to leave. Now. Take him with us. He looked at Cedric. Grab Wormtail. I'll get the bundle. We go back through the portkey. The cup's gone, Cedric said. He was right. The cup had disappeared when they'd arrived. One-way portkey. Then we make our own. He reached into his pocket. He had a length of rope in there, standard toolkits and second task prep, Hermione's suggestion. He pulled it out. Portus, he said, pushing everything he had into it, the full weight of his magic, and felt the rope vibrate and take the charm. Grab it. Grab Wormtail. Don't let go. Cedric grabbed the rope with one hand and Wormtail's collar with the other. Harry grabbed the bundle with his free hand. It was lighter than he expected, and it screamed at the contact, a thin horrible sound, and seized the rope. He said the activation word and the graveyard dissolved. They landed hard on the Hogwarts grounds, 20 feet from the maze entrance, in the full sight of the crowd. The silence from the stands was enormous and immediate. Harry was on his hands and knees in the grass with the bundle still in his hand, which was still screaming, and Cedric was beside him with Wormtail rigid in his grip. He was bleeding from his arm and his forehead. The gravestone had done more than he thought, and the mark on his wrist was blazing hot, and his whole left side felt like something had tried to rearrange it. He got up anyway. got up because staying down was a choice and not the right one. Pushed to his feet, breathing hard, and looked at the crowd. The stands were dead silent. 200 witches and wizards watching a Triwizard champion land in the grass with a screaming bundle and a bound man, and not one of them knowing what they were looking at. He looked at Dumbledore first. The old man was already moving, not running. Dumbledore didn't run, but moving with a speed that his age didn't account for, coming down from the judges' stand toward them. Behind him, Cornelius Fudge was rising from his seat with an expression that moved through shock into something more calculating in a way that Harry clocked and filed away. He pressed his thumb to the mark. The response was immediate, 3 pulses, blazing hot, all 3 of them at once and desperate and present. He pressed back twice. "I'm all right. I'm standing." "Dumbledore," he said, when the old man reached them. "Harry." Dumbledore's eyes moved over him, the blood, the arm, the bundle, Wormtail. His expression was doing something complicated, the reading a story while living in it quality that Harry had seen before and recognized as the old man processing something significant very fast. "The bundle. Don't touch it yet. I don't know what it does to whatever's in it." Harry looked at Wormtail. "Peter Pettigrew. You'll find he's missing a hand. He was declared dead 12 years ago. He's not." He looked at the bundle. "And whatever is in that, I don't know what it is exactly. But I know who it's meant to be." Dumbledore looked at the bundle. His face did something very still. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe I know too." "Is it him?" Harry asked. "Is it actually him, or is it? It is a form of him," Dumbledore said, with the precision of someone who had thought about this for a long time. "Diminished. Incomplete. Not what he was attempting to become tonight." He looked at Harry with eyes that were very clear and very old, and very steady. "You interrupted the ritual." "We interrupted the ritual," Cedric said from Harry's right. Dumbledore looked at Cedric. At the rigid Wormtail in his grip. "Extraordinary," he said very quietly, which coming from Dumbledore was a word with significant weight. "Headmaster." Harry looked at him directly. "What happens now matters. Specifically, what you say, what Fudge says, and what the official record says." He paused. "I need you to be accurate." Dumbledore held his gaze. "I intend to be. Even if it's inconvenient for the minister." A pause. "Especially then," Dumbledore said. And Harry believed him. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. Madame Pomfrey arrived and descended on Harry with the focused intensity of a woman who took injuries as a personal offense. She fixed his arm in 45 seconds and his head in 30, and then turned to Cedric with the same brisk fury, and Harry used the brief moment of not being medically managed to look for the stands. They were coming down. He found them before they found him. Hermione first. Her school robes and the particular way she moved when she was frightened and trying not to be, half running across the grounds with Ron at her shoulder. Behind them, slightly further, in the dark cloaks without house colors, Daphne. And at Daphne's side, not running but walking with the composed urgency of someone who had decided that running was not the correct register for this moment, Astoria. He met Hermione first, and she pulled up short 2 feet away and looked at him, head to toe, fast and comprehensive, cataloging, and then he could see her reach the conclusion that he was standing upright and apparently functional, and something in her exhaled, a full-body thing. "You're bleeding," she said. "Was. Pomfrey fixed it." He looked at her. "I'm all right." She stepped forward and put her arms around him, which was the most unambiguous thing Hermione Granger had done in the entire duration of their friendship, and he put his arms around her, and for a moment the chaos of the grounds was somewhere else, and there was just this. "I felt it," she said into his shoulder. "When the mark blazed. I felt it from the stands and She stopped. "I knew something had gone very wrong. And then it went less wrong," he said. "The bundle," she said, pulling back to look at him. "What's in the bundle?" He looked at her steadily. "Voldemort." Her face went through several things in quick succession. "He's not what he was trying to become." Dumbledore thinks the ritual was interrupted before completion. He glanced at where Dumbledore and 3 other professors were now managing the bundle with considerable magical care and evident urgency. He's contained. For now. For now, Hermione repeated. It won't hold indefinitely. But it changes the timeline. He looked at her. It buys us time. Daphne reached them. She stopped, looked at Harry with those winter-water eyes, and said nothing for a moment, just looked, with the directness she reserved for things she wasn't going to say anything peripheral about. You came back, she said. I said I would. You did. She looked at the mark on his wrist. Her own mark was visible. She'd pushed her sleeve up at some point, probably when it blazed. It was very loud, she said. In the stands. The mark. I thought I know what you thought. He met her eyes. I knew too. And I decided no. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face, the thing she kept behind the composure, the real thing, letting itself be seen for exactly as long as it needed to be. Then she said very quietly, Good, and stepped forward and put her hand briefly on his arm, exactly where she'd pressed it on the estate at Easter, the same gesture, deliberate and certain. Astoria appeared at Daphne's shoulder and looked at Harry and said, Wormtail. Was that really Peter Pettigrew? Yes, Harry said. He's supposed to be dead. He's not. Astoria looked at the rigid-bound man being managed by 2 Aurors who had appeared from somewhere. This is going to be very complicated for Sirius Black's case, she said. Harry stared at her. Yes. Exactly. How did you, Sirius Black, escape from Azkaban claiming Pettigrew was alive and that he himself was innocent and had been framed? Astoria said with the matter-of-factness of someone who had done their research on every relevant topic in orbit of Harry Potter at some point in the past 5 months. If Pettigrew is actually alive and was just captured in a graveyard, the Ministry's case against Sirius Black collapses. She tilted her head. Your father's lawyers, she said to Daphne. We should discuss Sirius Black. Daphne looked at her sister for a moment. Then at Harry. She's been researching everything connected to you since January, she said. Everything. I've stopped trying to contain it. I've been systematic, Astoria said without apology. Harry laughed. Actually laughed, sudden and real and startled out of him. The grounds were chaos around them, professors and Aurors and the controlled urgency of something significant being managed, and he was standing in the middle of it laughing at a 13-year-old girl who had spent 5 months building a complete dossier on his life. Serious, he said. Yes. Absolutely. That's yes. He looked at Astoria with something that was very close to the feeling he got when Hermione said something that cut straight to what mattered. You're extraordinary. Astoria received this with great dignity. I know, she said. But thank you. Fudge tried to speak to Harry that night. He came to the hospital wing where Pomfrey had installed Harry for observation, not because there's anything wrong with you, Potter, but because I said so, with 2 Ministry officials and the particular energy of a man who had a narrative, and needed to place Harry inside it before anyone else could. Harry was sitting up in the hospital bed with Hermione on his right, and Daphne on his left, and Astoria at the foot of it doing homework with her usual brisk efficiency. Fudge looked at this arrangement, and his energy shifted perceptibly. Harry, he said warmly. It must have been terrifying in that maze. We're all so relieved, Minister, Harry said. You'll want to speak to Pettigrew before he's processed by your Aurors. He has things to say about Voldemort's current state and about Sirius Black's innocence that are going to significantly change your Ministry's position on several active cases. Fudge flinched at the name. Harry, now, there's no need to. The reports suggest some kind of. The maze magic can produce hallucinations, and what you think you saw, I brought Pettigrew back, Harry said. He's alive. He's in Ministry custody right now. His testimony will establish Sirius Black's innocence and will corroborate what I've told Dumbledore about Voldemort's, you know who, Fudge said sharply, is gone. He has been gone for 13 years, and whatever magic produced that creature in the bundle, is his current form. Harry said. Interrupted Ritual. He was attempting to restore himself tonight, and we stopped it. The bundle is him. He looked at Fudge steadily. You can choose to accept that now, on your own terms, or you can have it demonstrated to you by events over the next year. He paused. I'd recommend the first option. Fudge was very still. His two officials were looking at their shoes in the specific way of people who wish they were elsewhere. The Greengrass Compact's pre-ministry standing, Hermione said from Harry's right, in the pleasant academic tone she used when she was delivering something with significant legal weight. Filed with the Wisengamot Standing Committee pending full panel review. The panel review is scheduled for mid-July. She looked at Fudge. The pre-ministry standing gives the contracted parties the right to bring matters of public magical safety directly to the full Wisengamot panel without ministry intermediaries. If the ministry's response to tonight's events is inadequate, we have that option available. The Greengrass family, Daphne said from Harry's left, employs excellent lawyers. They're already aware of tonight's events. My father was in the stands. She held Fudge's gaze. He has opinions. Fudge looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The Minister of Magic was not a stupid man. He was a frightened man who had built a career on avoiding frightening things, and the problem with that strategy was that the frightening things kept existing regardless. He looked at Harry, the boy in the hospital bed with the mark on his wrist and 3 women flanking him, and the calm absolute certainty of someone who had just come back from a graveyard and found it less than definitive, and performed a rapid internal calculation. He said. I'll need to review the official reports. Before any public statements. Of course, Harry said. Take your time. The Quibbler runs a special edition every Thursday. He held Fudge's gaze. We have a good relationship with Mr. Lovegood. Fudge left. The hospital wing was quiet for a moment. Then Astoria set down her quill and said, He's going to try to spin it. He'll spend 2 weeks trying to find a version that doesn't require him to admit Voldemort exists in any form, and then the evidence will become untenable, and he'll spend the next year performing a very slow capitulation. That's an accurate prediction, Hermione said. I know. Astoria picked her quill back up. It means we have approximately 2 weeks to make the accurate version so thoroughly public that his spin has nowhere to go. She looked at Harry. The Quibbler. The Quibbler, Harry confirmed. And the pre-ministry Wisengamot standing, Daphne said. Father is going to want to invoke it. Not as a threat this time, as an actual mechanism. Bring the evidence of tonight directly to the full panel, bypass Fudge entirely, and make a formal Wisengamot record of Voldemort's continued existence. She looked at Harry. It means putting yourself in front of the full Wisengamot. Testifying. Fine, Harry said. Daphne looked at him. You'll be questioned for hours. The full panel is 63 members and they all have, Daphne, Harry said. She stopped. Fine, he said again. She held his gaze. Then she said, Right, and pulled out her own parchment and began making notes. Dumbledore came at midnight. The others had gone by then. Pomfrey's visiting hours were firm regardless of ancient contracts or political situations, and Harry was alone in the quiet of the hospital wing with his thoughts, and the mark's steady warmth. Dumbledore came in and sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. You should rest, he said. In a minute. Harry looked at him. Sirius. I've already sent a Patronus to him, Dumbledore said. He's aware of Pettigrew's capture. The process of formally establishing his innocence will take time. The Ministry will not move quickly on this, but the path is open. It was closed before tonight. Harry nodded. Pettigrew's testimony, will it hold? He can recant? With the information I've extracted from his wand regarding tonight's ritual, and with Veritaserum administered in formal hearing, no. He cannot effectively recant. Dumbledore paused. You thought of Sirius immediately. Astoria thought of it first. Harry said honestly. Dumbledore looked faintly, just faintly, amused. The youngest Greengrass. She's remarkable. She really is. Harry looked at the ceiling. What happened tonight, what it means for Voldemort. How long do we have? Unknown, Dumbledore said, with the precision of someone refusing to speculate beyond what he knew. The ritual's interruption has set him back significantly. The form he's currently in cannot easily seek another attempt. The components required are specific, and several of them were present in that graveyard and are now in Ministry custody. He paused. Months. Perhaps more. Perhaps less. The honest answer is that we don't know. But it's coming, Harry said. It is coming. Dumbledore agreed. Harry looked at the mark on his wrist. 3 intertwined lines, moving in their slow, certain pattern. When it comes properly, I'm not going to be alone. Dumbledore looked at the mark. At Harry. His expression did something that was not quite sad and not quite hopeful, and was instead the specific emotional register of very old men who have seen how these things end and don't entirely control what they feel about it. No, he said. I don't believe you will be. The order, Harry said. You're going to reconvene it. A pause. You know about the order. I know it existed. I know you'll need it again. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I want to be in it. You're 14. I'm 14 and I just brought Peter Pettigrew back from a graveyard, Harry said. The age argument has some structural issues. He paused. I'm not asking to be handled by it. I'm asking to be in it. There's a difference. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The Midnight Hospital wing was very still. I know, he said finally. There is. Well? Another pause. Then, when it reconvenes, Dumbledore said, I would find your presence valuable. It wasn't yes. It was close enough to yes that Harry let it rest. Thank you, he said. Dumbledore rose. Paused at the door. Harry. Harry looked at him. The mark, Dumbledore said. The compact. Whatever people say about it, whatever the Ministry makes of it or the press or anyone else. He paused. Magic evaluates genuinely. The Greengrass compact has been dormant for 3 generations and it chose tonight's version of you. He let the silence hold that for a moment. I find that quite interesting. He left. The door closed softly. Harry lay back in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling and felt, underneath the exhaustion and the blood and the cold memory of the graveyard, something that was very simple and very clear. He'd gone to the graveyard and come back. He'd brought Pettigrew. He'd interrupted a ritual that would have changed everything. He'd stood in that hospital room and told Fudge exactly what was real and exactly what the options were and watched the Minister of Magic understand, for the first time, that the landscape had changed. He pressed his thumb to the mark. 1 pulse, slow, warm, late. Someone awake. He pressed back twice. I'm here. I'm all right. 1 pulse back. Long, steady. Daphne, he thought. The others would have gone to sleep, Hermione exhausted, Astoria young enough to actually rest when rest was required. But Daphne would be sitting somewhere with a book she wasn't reading, waiting for the mark to settle. He pressed back once. Go to sleep. A pause. Then 2 slow pulses. The suggestion of amusement through the bond, translated into pressure and warmth. You first. He almost smiled. Then he closed his eyes, and sleep came fast and certain, and the mark pulsed warm on his wrist through all of it. June became July. The Wizarding World had, as Astoria had predicted, approximately 2 weeks before the official narrative became untenable. The Quibbler ran its special edition. Xenophilius Lovegood published Harry's full account of the graveyard with the meticulous documentary care of someone who understood that this particular piece of journalism would matter beyond its immediate news cycle. The account included Cedric's testimony, which was delivered via pensive for the Quibbler's publication in a level of detail that made the Ministry's parallel account, which called the events a tournament accident involving unspecified dark magic, look not just inadequate but deliberately evasive. The Wizengamot full panel review happened on July 19th. Harry appeared before 63 members of the Wizarding World's highest judicial body and answered questions for 4 hours and 40 minutes. He answered them directly, fully, without performance or apology. He told them about the Portkey, the graveyard, Wormtail, the ritual, the bundle. He told them about the Imperier's curse on Crumb, which implicated someone with access to the maze who wasn't a student. He told them, when asked about Voldemort's current state, exactly what Dumbledore had assessed and exactly what Harry's own observation confirmed. He brought the pre-ministry legal standing, documented and filed by Cyrus Greengrass's lawyers, which gave the Wizengamot panel a formal record of everything he'd said that existed entirely outside the ministry's ability to seal or suppress. He was not frightened. Not of the chamber, not of the 63 pairs of eyes, not of the formal robes, and the old magic in the walls and the weight of the institution around him. He'd been 14 years old in a graveyard and decided no. A courtroom was straightforward after that. Pettigrew testified under Veritaserum. Sirius Black's innocence was formally declared on July 22nd. The Prophet ran it on the front page, reluctantly, with a headline that managed to give Fudge some kind of credit even in his failure that Harry found more impressive than anything else the ministry had managed all year. Sirius was free. Harry got the owl on the 22nd, Sirius's handwriting, shakier than usual but real, unmistakable, free. The letter was 4 sentences. I'm out. They gave me back my wand. I'm sitting in the sun at Grimmauld Place, and there's a cup of tea and I haven't stopped crying for about an hour, and I am absolutely fine. Thank you? Harry read it in the Gryffindor common room on a Tuesday morning with the sunlight coming through the tower windows, and something that had been clenched in his chest for a very long time released all at once, and he sat with that for a minute before he went to find the others. Hermione read it, and said nothing for a moment, then reached over and held his hand. Ron read it and said, "About bloody time," with a ferocity that was entirely love. Daphne read it, handed it back, and said, "Good. You can stop carrying that now." Astoria read it and said, "I've been compiling evidence for a formal innocence case for 3 months. It's good that it wasn't needed, but I'd like to keep the files in case of future legal challenge." She paused. "Is that morbid?" "It's practical," Harry said. "Good," Astoria said. "That's what I was going for." September arrived. The 5th year started with all the weight of what was coming, OWLs, the reconstituted order, Fudge's ongoing slow public collapse, Voldemort in whatever form the interrupted ritual had left him, the specific political landscape of a wizarding world that was beginning, reluctantly and unevenly, to believe that the boy who lived had been right. But before September, there was the last week of August at Greengrass Manor. Harry arrived on a Monday to find Helena in the garden with the Lithomandragora, Astoria rebuilding what appeared to be a mechanical project on the sitting room floor, and Daphne at the kitchen table with a copy of the Wizengamot records Harry had filed and a set of notes she'd been making for 3 weeks. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her and thought about the Yule Ball, which was 9 months ago, and felt both much longer and much closer than that. The ice sculptures and the biscuit, and the conversation about thinking. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I'm appreciating," he said. She looked up. "There's a difference." "I know." He came in and sat across from her. "What are you working on?" "The Order." She met his eyes. "Dumbledore's asked my father to consider a role. Not membership. My father's not. He's not an Order person, he's too strategic for it. The Order runs on loyalty, and my father runs on information. But there's a consulting arrangement being discussed." She looked at her notes. "It would formalize what we've already been doing. The legal standing, the political positioning. Give it a structure within Dumbledore's organization. What does your father think?" "He's interested," Daphne said, which for Cyrus was equivalent to passionate commitment. "He has conditions." "What conditions?" "That the family's position is respected. That the consulting is real, not decorative. That Dumbledore actually takes his assessments into account rather than collecting the Greengrass name for political cover." She paused. And that you're in the order. Harry looked at her. He made that a condition? He said. She stopped. Something moved in her face, briefly. He said that whatever the order does in the next year, you'll be at the center of it, and he prefers to be in the same room as the center rather than adjacent to it. A pause. That's my father saying he trusts you. In the specific language he uses for things he trusts. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, tell him the conditions are acceptable. I thought you'd say that. She looked down at her notes. There's something else. He waited. The compact, she said. It's been 9 months. The first year period ends in December. After that, the bond deepens, Harry said. Yes. She looked at him. I want you to know that. I want to be clear that I'm not, that whatever I feel about the bond deepening is not the magic talking. It's. She stopped. I'm not good at this. You're excellent at most things, he said. You can be allowed one difficulty. She looked at him with those winter water eyes and said, with the careful precision of someone choosing exactly the right words for something that mattered, I've been thinking, since Easter, since the estate, since watching you in that ministry hearing room refusing to be small, I've been thinking that the magic had very good taste. A pause. And that I'm glad it woke up. The kitchen was warm. The August afternoon was golden through the windows. Somewhere in the sitting room, Astoria's mechanical project made a sound of partial success. So am I, Harry said. The mark pulsed warm on both their wrists at the same moment, which neither of them mentioned because some things were better left as what they were, present, certain, not needing annotation. Hermione found him that evening in the garden, in the last light, where the beech trees at the field's edge were in full late summer leaf and the stream was low and quick. She sat beside him on the old stone wall and they looked at the field together in the way they'd been looking at things together for 5 years, not needing to perform the looking, just doing it. I've been thinking about next year, she said. OWLs. Among other things. She looked at her hands. The order. The Wisengamot standing. The political situation with Fudge, it's going to get worse before it gets better. He's going to double down on the denial and it's going to require constant counter-narrative management. She paused. There's a great deal to do. There is. Harry agreed. I find I'm. She stopped. Started again. I find I'm not afraid of it. Which is strange, because by any rational measure the situation is significantly dangerous and getting more so, and I am generally a person who finds that frightening. She looked at him. But I'm not. And I think it's because we have people, Harry said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Do you remember what I said the night of the ball? That the magic was measuring who you are, not who you're with. Yes. I've been thinking about that. About what it means for all of this. She looked at the mark on her wrist. The magic didn't make any of this. The dance, the conversation about ice sculptures, Astoria's boldness, what you said in Cyrus's office, the graveyard, none of that was the magic. The magic just confirmed it. Gave it a shape. A very legally binding shape. Harry said. She laughed. Yes. That. She looked at him sideways. I'm glad I was standing there. That night. You were always going to be standing there, he said. That's rather the point. She looked at him for a moment, and the expression that had been there since the ball, the one that had always been there, just visible now, was fully present, unhidden, decided. Yes, she said simply. It rather is. They sat on the wall until the light was gone and the first stars came through, the stream talking to itself in the dark below them, the old beech trees settling into night. The mark on his wrist pulsed warm and steady, fourfold now, all 4 of them, the web Hermione had described, each point reinforcing the others, stronger with time and contact and the accumulation of real things. He pressed his thumb to it, and felt all 3 responses come back at once. Present. Certain. Here. He was 14 years old and Voldemort was not dead and the Ministry was in the early stages of a slow capitulation, and Sirius was free and the graveyard was behind him and everything that was coming was still coming, patient and inevitable as seasons. There was no clean ending here, no resolution that tied everything off. The story was a beginning, just as it had always been, just as every ending was a beginning if you were still standing when it happened. He was still standing. He looked up at the stars, the same ones the enchanted ceiling had shown them in December, the same cold sharp stars over a clear winter night when a girl had talked about ice sculptures and told him the truth about something, and everything had shifted on its axis without him quite feeling it move. He was not performing strength. He was not hiding behind anything. He was exactly where he was, and it was enough, and it was real, and it was his. The stream kept talking. The stars kept burning. The mark on his wrist kept its fourfold pulse, warm and patient and certain. Harry Potter looked at the night and decided what came next.